The marriage contract sat between them like a loaded gun. Clara Vance stared at the stranger across her father's kitchen table, this Rowan Hale with his worn boots and calculating eyes, and made a choice that would scandalize every soul in Pinewood Hollow. She would marry a man the town called a drifter. She would trade herself for her father's survival. But as she signed her name in steady strokes, something in Rowan's expression shifted. Not gratitude, not relief, something closer to recognition, like he'd been waiting for someone exactly like her, someone desperate enough to be dangerous. If you're ready to see how far desperation can take you, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Clara Vance had learned early that survival didn't care about dignity. It came down to choices, the kind that left marks you couldn't scrub away, no matter how hard you tried. And on that particular October morning, with frost creeping across the window panes and her father's labored breathing rattling through the thin walls of their cabin, she was about to make the worst choice of her life. Or maybe the best. She hadn't decided yet. "You're out of your mind," her sister Lenora said, pacing the narrow space between the stove and the table. "You don't know this man. You don't know anything about him except what Bill Hutchins told you, and Bill's half drunk most days." Clara didn't look up from the letter she'd been reading and rereading for the past hour. The paper was cheap, the handwriting efficient. No flourishes, no false promises. Just a proposal laid out in terms so clear they felt almost brutal. "I need a wife. You need money. I can pay your father's debts and his medical bills. In return, you come with me and don't ask questions you don't need answered." "Bill says he's from up in the high country," Clara said. "Has some kind of operation in the mountains. Keeps to himself." "Keeps to himself," Lenore repeated, her voice climbing. "Clara, that could mean anything. He could be a criminal. He could be our only option." The words landed hard. Lenora stopped pacing. In the bedroom, their father coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Clara's chest tighten. Dr. Morrison had been clear. Without proper medicine, without care they couldn't afford, Edmund Vance had maybe 2 months, probably less. The mine collapse 3 years ago had broken more than his leg. It had broken his spirit, his body, his ability to provide. Clara had tried. She'd worked every job Pinewood Hollow offered: laundry, mending, cleaning the church, helping at the general store. Lenora brought in what she could from teaching the youngest children their letters. But it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. And now the debt collectors were circling, men with hard eyes and harder terms. Pay up or lose everything. Clara folded the letter carefully. "I'm meeting him today, at the hotel." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." Clara stood, smoothing down her best dress, which wasn't saying much. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, the hem let out twice already. But it was clean, and it would have to do. "If he's legitimate, if he can actually pay what he's offering, then I'm going to say yes." Lenora grabbed her arm. "And if he's not? If he's dangerous?" Clara met her sister's eyes. Lenora was 2 years younger, softer in ways Clara couldn't afford to be anymore. "Then I'll deal with it. But Dad needs help now. Not next month. Not after we've tried everything else. Now." She pulled free gently, gathered her shawl, and walked out before Lenora could argue further. The October air bit at her face as she made her way down the rutted main street of Pinewood Hollow. The town was dying, had been dying for years, ever since the primary mine played out and the lumber company moved operations 50 miles west. Half the buildings stood empty. The rest sagged under the weight of better days long past. The Mountaineer Hotel occupied the corner of Main and Cedar, a 2-story structure that had seen grander times. Clara pushed through the door into the dim lobby, where Thomas Beck looked up from his ledger. "He's in the dining room," Thomas said, before she could ask. "Arrived an hour ago, paid in advance, cash." Clara nodded her thanks and moved toward the doorway that led to the hotel's modest dining area. Her heart was beating too fast. She forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly. This was just another negotiation. She'd negotiated with creditors, with employers, with men who thought a young woman alone could be pushed around. She could handle this. Rowan Hale sat at the corner table, his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. He'd been waiting for her, expecting her. He didn't smile when she entered, just gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. Clara took him in as she crossed the room. 30, maybe 35. Tall. She could tell even with him sitting down. Broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of physical labor, not leisure. His clothes were plain but well-made, practical. Work boots that had seen real use, hands that knew their way around tools or worse. His face was angular, weathered, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Not handsome in any conventional sense, but arresting. The kind of face that didn't forget easily. "Miss Vance," he said as she approached. His voice was low, rough-edged, not unkind, just neutral. "Please sit." She sat. The table between them held 2 cups of coffee, both untouched. Rowan pushed one toward her. "I don't drink coffee," Clara said. "Then don't." He leaned back slightly, studying her with the same intensity she'd been studying him. "You came. That tells me you're considering it." "I'm considering a lot of things," Clara said, starting with why a man with money enough to make the offer you made needs to buy a wife. Something flickered in his expression, not quite amusement, but close. Direct. "I like that." "I don't have time for games, Mr. Hale. My father's dying. If you're serious, then let's talk seriously. If you're not, then I need to go find other options." "There are no other options," Rowan said flatly. "If there were, you wouldn't be here." The truth of it stung, but Clara kept her face neutral. "Then answer my question." Rowan was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming once against the table before going still. "I run an operation in the mountains. It's isolated, difficult work. The men who work for me are rough. I need someone who can manage the domestic side of things. Someone smart enough to handle accounts, supplies, planning. Someone who won't run at the first sign of difficulty." "You could hire a housekeeper." "I could, but a housekeeper doesn't have the same authority, doesn't carry the same weight." He paused. "And frankly, I'm tired of living alone." Clara watched him carefully. There was something he wasn't saying, but she couldn't quite pin it down. "What kind of operation?" "The kind that makes money," Rowan said. "Legal, if that's what you're asking, but it requires discretion." "Discretion about what?" "About how I make my money, about who I do business with, about what happens on my property." His gaze didn't waver. "I told you in the letter, you don't ask questions you don't need answered. That's part of the deal." Clara's jaw tightened. "And what else is part of the deal?" "You come with me to the mountains. You manage the household, the accounts, the logistics. You present yourself as my wife in all dealings. In return, I clear your father's debts immediately, all of them. I pay for his medical care, whatever he needs, for as long as he needs it. Your sister gets an allowance, enough to live comfortably. You get a roof, food, security. And if I want to leave, then you leave," Rowan said simply. "But the financial support stops. The debts come back. Your father's on his own again." It was a trap dressed up as generosity. Clara knew it. Rowan knew she knew it. But it was still better than watching her father waste away while creditors picked their bones. "What about other expectations?" Clara asked, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "You said wife in all dealings. I need to know what that means." Rowan's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted slightly. "It means we present as married to the outside world. What happens privately is between us. I won't force anything you're not willing to give. That's not much of a promise. It's the only one I'm offering." Clara looked down at her hands, rough and reddened from work. She thought about her father's face, gaunt and gray. About Lenora, trying so hard to be strong. About the future that was slipping away day by day, replaced by nothing but struggle and loss. "I want it in writing," she said finally. "All of it. The debts cleared, the medical care, Lenore's allowance, specific amounts, specific terms. And I want a clause that says if you break the agreement, I keep whatever money's been put aside for my family." Now Rowan did smile, just slightly. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about nothing else since I got your letter." Clara raised her eyes to his. "I'm not fool enough to trust a stranger's word, Mr. Hale. If we're doing this, we're doing it right." "Fair enough." Rowan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "I had my lawyer draw this up yesterday. Read it. Make sure it says what you need it to say." Clara took the papers and read them slowly, carefully. The legal language was dense, but the terms were clear. Rowan Hale would immediately pay the sum of $800 to clear Edmund Vance's outstanding debts. He would establish
This story
a
was
medical
posted
account
on the
of
channel
$200,
west of Betrayal.
renewable annually.
Please do not
for Edmund's
repost it
care.
in any form.
He would provide Lenora Vance with a monthly allowance of $20. In return, Clara Vance would relocate to Rowan Hale's property, assume management of domestic operations, and present herself as his lawful wife. There were other clauses, provisions about property, about conduct, about termination of the agreement, but the core of it was exactly what he'd promised. This says we'd be legally married, Clara said, not just presenting as married. Easier that way, Rowan said. Cleaner, less questions from people who matter. People who matter, Claire repeated. Who are these people exactly? Business associates, investors, government officials when necessary. Rowan's tone suggested he wouldn't elaborate further. The marriage needs to be real in the eyes of the law. What it is between us is our business. Clara read through the document one more time. $800. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. Enough to save her father. Enough to give Lenora a chance at something better. Enough to sell herself to a stranger. I need one more thing, Clara said. A trial period. 3 months. If at the end of that time I decide I can't stay, you let me go without penalty. The money for my father and sister stays in place, but I'm free to leave. Rowan considered this. 2 months, and you have to give me a genuine effort. No looking for excuses to bail out. 2 months, Clara agreed, but I define what constitutes a genuine effort. Stubborn, Rowan observed. Practical. He pulled out a pen and made a notation on the contract. Anything else? Clara thought hard. I want to know what happens if you die. Do I lose everything? You'd inherit the property and assets, Rowan said. That's standard marriage law, but I'll make sure it's spelled out explicitly. He made another notation, then slid the contract across the table with the pen. Your turn. Clara stared at the paper. This was it. The moment where she either walked away and let fate take its course, or she stepped off the edge of everything she knew. She picked up the pen. Her signature looked small and stark on the line. Final. Rowan signed below hers, his handwriting as blunt and efficient as the man himself. Then he folded the contract, tucked it back into his coat, and stood. We leave in 2 days, Pierre, he said. Bring what you can carry. Practical clothes, nothing fancy. It's a hard trip up to the property. 2 days? Clara stood as well, suddenly feeling the weight of what she'd just agreed to. That's not much time. It's enough time to say goodbye and pack a bag, Rowan said. More than that, you'll just second-guess yourself. He pulled out a thick envelope and set it on the table. This is for your father's debts. Take care of them today. I'll arrange for Dr. Morrison to receive the medical account funds directly. Your sister's allowance will be sent monthly starting next week. Clara picked up the envelope with shaking hands. It was heavy, real. The ceremony's tomorrow morning, Rowan continued. 10 o'clock at the courthouse, just us and witnesses. No fuss. Tomorrow, Clara repeated numbly. Tomorrow. Rowan met her eyes, and for the first time, something almost like sympathy crossed his face. I know this isn't what you imagined for yourself, Miss Vance, but I'll keep my word. You'll be treated fairly. That's more than most women in your position can say. He left without waiting for a response. Clara stood there holding the envelope, her heart hammering, her mind racing. In less than 24 hours, she'd be married to a man she'd known for all of 30 minutes. In less than 48, she'd leave everything she'd ever known. The smart thing would be to run, to tear up the contract and find another way. But Clara had learned long ago that smart and possible weren't always the same thing. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Clara wore the same dress she'd worn to meet Rowan, washed and pressed as carefully as she could manage. Lenora helped her pin up her hair, neither of them speaking much. There wasn't much to say. Their father had wept when Clara told him, not from joy, he was too far gone to muster much of that, but from relief mixed with guilt. He'd tried to refuse, tried to tell her she didn't have to sacrifice herself for him, but they both knew it was already done. The courthouse ceremony was exactly as stark as Clara had expected. Judge Morrison, Dr. Morrison's uncle, performed the service with brisk efficiency. Bill Hutchins stood as Rowan's witness, looking uncomfortable in a collar that was too tight. Lenora stood with Clara, gripping her hand so hard it hurt. "Do you, Clara Evangeline Vance, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara looked at Rowan. He looked back, his expression unreadable. "I do." "Do you, Rowan James Hale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the state, I pronounce you husband and wife." No kiss, no celebration, just signatures on paper and a marriage certificate that felt like a prison sentence and a lifeline all at once. They left within the hour. Rowan had 2 horses waiting, solid mountain breeds built for endurance, not speed. He'd also brought a pack mule loaded with supplies. Claire said her goodbyes to Lenora quickly, unable to bear the look on her sister's face. Then she mounted the horse Rowan indicated and followed him out of Pinewood Hollow. She didn't look back. The trail climbed steadily from the start. Rowan set a pace that was challenging but sustainable, clearly expecting Clara to keep up. She did, though her legs ached within the first hour. She'd ridden before. Everyone in Pinewood had, but never for this kind of distance. They rode in silence through the morning, the trail narrowing as it wound higher into the mountains. The forest pressed close on both sides, dense with pine and fir. The air grew thinner, colder. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and focused on keeping her seat. Around midday, Rowan called a halt near a small stream. He helped Clara down, the first time he'd touched her since they'd signed the marriage certificate, and began unpacking food from the saddlebags. "Eat," he said, handing her bread and dried meat. "We've got another 5 hours ahead of us." Clara ate mechanically, too aware of the silence between them. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. "Tell me about where we're going." Rowan chewed thoughtfully before answering. "It's called Ironwood Ridge, about 2,000 acres, mostly forested. The main compound sits in a valley. House, outbuildings, work structures. There are about 40 men on site at any given time." "Doing what?" "Various things," Rowan said, which wasn't really an answer. Clara tried again. "These men, are they safe?" "They know the rules. No one touches what's mine." The way he said it, flat, certain, sent a chill down Clara's spine. "You'll have your own space in the house, locked if you want it, but you'll need to interact with the men eventually. They'll test you, see if you're tough enough to be there. And if I'm not? Then they'll make your life difficult until you are." Rowan looked at her directly. "I can give you authority, Clara, but you'll have to earn their respect yourself. That's not something I can do for you." Clara nodded slowly, filing that information away. "What about other women? Are there any?" "A few in the settlement down the mountain. They come up sometimes to do laundry, cooking for large crews, but none living on the property." He paused. "You'll be the first." "Lucky me," Clara muttered. Rowan almost smiled. "You'll manage. You're tougher than you look." "You don't know anything about how tough I am." "I know you married a stranger to save your family," Rowan said quietly. "I know you negotiated terms instead of just accepting what was offered. I know you're here instead of running." He stood, brushing crumbs from his hands. "That tells me enough." They rode on. The trail grew steeper, more treacherous. Clara's horse picked its way carefully over loose stone and exposed roots. The forest began to change. More spruce now, stunted and twisted by altitude and wind. In the distance, Clara could see peaks still capped with snow, despite it being October. As the afternoon wore on, fatigue settled into Clara's bones. Her back ached, her thighs burned. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. Rowan had been right. She was stubborn, and she'd be damned if she'd show weakness on the first day. The sun was touching the western peaks when Rowan finally reined in at the crest of a ridge. He gestured ahead. "There, Ironwood Ridge." Clara urged her horse forward until she could see. The valley spread below them, carved between steep mountainsides. A river cut through the center, glinting in the fading light. And there, nestled in a clearing near the water, was a compound that looked nothing like what Clara had expected. This wasn't some rough logging camp or mining operation. It was organized, substantial. A large main house dominated the center, 2 stories, solid construction, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Around it clustered various buildings, barns, workshops, storage
This story
sheds,
was
what looked
posted
like
on the channel
bunkhouses.
west of
There were
Betrayal.
corrals with
Please
horses,
do not repost
stacks
it
of
in any
lumber,
form.
wagons, and equipment she couldn't identify from this distance. And everywhere, movement. Men working, moving between buildings, tending fires. From up here, they looked like ants in a purposeful colony. "What is this place?" Clara breathed. Rowan studied her reaction carefully. "Home," he said simply. "For now, at least." They descended as twilight gathered. As they drew closer, Clara could make out more details. The buildings were well maintained, the grounds organized and clean. This wasn't the rough operation she'd imagined. It was something more deliberate, more permanent. Men stopped their work to watch as they rode in. Clara felt their eyes on her, assessing, curious, some openly hostile. She kept her chin up, her expression neutral, even as her heart hammered. Rowan led them directly to the main house and dismounted. A young man, barely more than a boy, hurried over to take the horses. "Welcome back, boss," he said, then darted a glance at Clara. "Ma'am." "This is Danny," Rowan said. "He helps with the horses and general work around the house. Danny, this is Mrs. Hale, my wife." The words hung in the air. Clara watched Danny's eyes widen slightly before he schooled his expression. "Yes, sir, ma'am. I'll take care of the horses." "See that you do," Rowan said. Then to Clara, "Come on, I'll show you inside." The house was warmer than Clara expected, heat radiating from a massive stone fireplace in what appeared to be the main room. The space was large, well furnished in a masculine way. Heavy wooden furniture, no real decoration, but everything solid and functional. A staircase led to the second floor. An older woman emerged from what Clara guessed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, sturdy and no-nonsense, with sharp eyes that took Clara's measure in an instant. "Mrs. Chen," Rowan said. "This is Clara, my wife. Clara, Mrs. Chen manages the kitchen and keeps the house running." Mrs. Chen's expression didn't change, but Clara caught something in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "Ma'am," she said with a slight nod. "Welcome. I've prepared the master bedroom upstairs, left side. There's water for washing and a fire laid." "Thank you," Clara managed. "Dinner in an hour," Mrs. Chen continued, addressing Rowan now. "The men are expecting you to address them." "I know." Rowan turned to Clara. "Go upstairs, get settled. I'll have Danny bring up your things. We'll eat, then I'll introduce you properly tomorrow." Clara nodded, grateful for the dismissal. She climbed the stairs on shaking legs, found the bedroom Mrs. Chen had indicated, and shut the door behind her. The room was large, dominated by a substantial bed covered in plain blankets. A wardrobe stood against one wall, a washstand against another. A fire crackled in the small fireplace, taking the edge off the mountain chill. Through the window, Claire could see the compound below, lights beginning to glow in the various buildings as full dark settled in. She sank onto the bed, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. What had she done? What was this place? A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Mrs. Hale? It's Danny. Got your bags." Clara opened the door to find the young man holding her single-worn carpet bag and satchel. "Thank you, Danny." "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "If you need anything, Mrs. Chen's your best bet. She's tough but fair. Been here longer than anyone except the boss." "I'll remember that," Clara said, surprised by the advice. Danny nodded and retreated quickly. Clara closed the door again and looked at her meager belongings. Everything she owned fit in one bag. Everything she'd been fit in a town she'd probably never see again. She unpacked mechanically, hanging her 2 other dresses in the wardrobe, setting out her brush and the few personal items she'd brought. Then she washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into her slightly less worn dress, and tried to gather herself. The dinner bell rang somewhere below. Clara took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and went downstairs. Mrs. Chen directed her to the dining room, where a long table was set for 2. Rowan was already there, standing by the window. He changed into a clean shirt, but otherwise looked the same, solid, controlled, unreadable. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one end of the table. He took the other. Mrs. Chen brought food, stew, bread, vegetables. Simple but well prepared. Clara realized she was starving and forced herself to eat slowly, methodically. "Tomorrow, I'll show you around properly," Rowan said after a few minutes of silence. "Introduce you to the key people. Explain how things run here." "All right." The men will be curious, some will be skeptical, a few might be openly hostile to the idea of a woman in a position of authority. Rowan's tone was matter-of-fact. "Don't let it rattle you. They need to see you're not going to break." Clara set down her spoon carefully. "I'm not going to break, Mr. Hale." "Rowan," he corrected. "We're married. Might as well use first names." "Rowan, then." Clara met his eyes. "And you might as well know. I didn't come here to fail. Whatever this place is, whatever you need me to do, I'll figure it out." Something shifted in his expression. "I believe you," he said quietly. They finished the meal in silence. Afterward, Rowan showed Clara the study, a room lined with ledgers and papers that would become her domain. The sheer volume of record-keeping was staggering, but Clara felt a spark of something almost like interest. This was work she could understand, could control. "You'll start reviewing these tomorrow," Rowan said. "I need someone who can track supplies, expenses, payroll, someone who can see patterns, spot problems before they become critical." "I can do that," Clara said, running her fingers along the ledger spines. "Good." Rowan moved toward the door, then paused. "Your bedroom locks from the inside. Use it if you want. I won't bother you." He left before Clara could respond. She stood alone in the study, surrounded by the evidence of Rowan's mysterious operation, and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. Yesterday, she'd been Clara Vance, drowning in debt and desperation in a dying town. Now she was Clara Hale, wife to a stranger, transplanted to a mountain compound that seemed to operate by its own rules. And somehow, despite the fear and uncertainty coursing through her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Clara woke to darkness and the sound of men's voices outside. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The mountain. The compound. Rowan. She fumbled for the lamp on the bedside table, got it lit, and checked the small clock Mrs. Chen had left. 4:30 in the morning. Outside her window, lanterns bobbed through the pre-dawn gloom as workers moved toward various buildings. Whatever operation Rowan ran, it started early. Clara dressed quickly in her plainest work dress, braided her hair, and made her way downstairs. The house was already warm, the kitchen alive with activity. Mrs. Chen stood at the massive stove, managing what looked like enough food to feed an army. "You're up early," the older woman observed without turning around. "Couldn't sleep," Clara admitted. "Can I help?" Now Mrs. Chen did turn, her sharp eyes assessing. "You cook?" "I can manage basics, nothing fancy. Basics are what we need here." Mrs. Chen gestured to a pile of potatoes. "Those need peeling. Breakfast crew comes through in shifts, first group at 5, last around 7. 43 men total right now, plus the boss." Clara grabbed a knife and started working. The familiar rhythm of peeling settled her nerves somewhat. What exactly do all these men do? "Ask your husband," Mrs. Chen said flatly. "Not my place to explain his business." It was a rebuke, gentle but firm. Clara filed it away and worked in silence for several minutes before trying again. "How long have you been here?" 6 years. Came up when my husband died. He'd worked for Mr. Hale's father back when this was just a logging camp. Rowan offered me kitchen work when he took over, expanded the operation. Mrs. Chen's hands never stopped moving as she talked, flipping pancakes, stirring oatmeal, checking bacon. "He's a fair man, hard but fair. Pays well, keeps his word." "His father owned this place?" "Built it, died 5 years back," Rowan inherited. Mrs. Chen shot her a look. "You really don't know anything about what you married into, do you?" "No," Clara said honestly. "I really don't." "Well," Mrs. Chen pulled a tray of biscuits from the oven. "You'll learn fast enough. This isn't a place for slow learners." The first shift of workers began filing through at 5 sharp, collecting plates of food from a serving window that opened between the kitchen and what Clara now realized was a large mess hall. She caught glimpses of rough men, most of them young and weathered, all of them casting curious glances toward the kitchen when they thought no one was looking. Rowan appeared just before 6, already dressed for work in canvas pants and a heavy shirt. He looked surprised to find Clara in the kitchen. "You didn't have to get up," he said. "Couldn't sleep. Mrs. Chen put me to work."
This story was posted on the channel
Rowan
West of
accepted a plate
Betrayal.
of food from Mrs.
Please
Chen,
do not
who prepared
repost
it without him
in any
asking.
form.
"After breakfast, meet me in the study. I'll walk you through the books before the morning meeting." He ate standing up, efficiently, then disappeared back outside. Clara watched him go, struck again by how little she knew this man she'd married. The breakfast rush ended around 7:30. Mrs. Chen sent Clara upstairs to wash and change. "You've got potato peel under your nails, girl, and you're about to meet people who'll judge you for less." And Clara obeyed, scrubbing her hands raw and changing into her best dress again. When she entered the study, Rowan was already there, surrounded by ledgers and papers. He looked up, gestured to the chair across from his desk. "How much do you know about bookkeeping?" "I kept the accounts for the general store back home for 2 years," Clara said. "Basic inventory, receivables, payables. Nothing complicated." "This is more complicated," Rowan said. He pulled out a ledger, opened it to reveal columns of figures in tight, precise handwriting. "We run multiple operations simultaneously, timber cutting and milling, a sawmill down the mountain that processes for external sale, contract work for railroad companies and mine operations, equipment rental, and some specialty manufacturing." Clara leaned forward, studying the numbers. The scale was staggering, thousands of dollars moving through accounts she was still trying to understand. Specialty manufacturing of what? Custom equipment, specialized tools, parts that are hard to source elsewhere. Rowan's tone suggested that was all the explanation she'd get. "The point is, it's complex. Multiple revenue streams, multiple expense categories, payroll for fluctuating crew sizes, supply chains that depend on weather and season. And you've been managing all this yourself?" "I've been managing the operation. The books have been adequate. But I need better than adequate. I need someone who can spot inefficiencies, predict cash flow problems, identify where we're losing money." He looked at her directly. "That's your job, along with managing household accounts, supply ordering for the compound, and eventually handling some of the supplier negotiations." Clara felt a flutter of something that might have been excitement. This was real work, substantial work, not just washing dishes and mending clothes. "All right, where do we start?" They spent the next 2 hours going through the systems Rowan had in place. His organizational method was logical but incomplete. He'd been tracking what he needed to track, but not analyzing patterns or looking for optimization. Clara's fingers itched to reorganize, to create better tracking systems, but she held back. First, she needed to understand what was actually happening. "The morning meeting starts at 9, Rowan said finally, closing the last ledger. "I meet with my foreman daily to coordinate work assignments, address problems, plan upcoming projects. You'll attend." "Will they expect that?" "No, which is why you're coming." Rowan stood. "I told you yesterday, you need to earn their respect. That starts with showing them you're part of how this place runs, not just decoration in the big house." Clara followed him out into the compound proper. In daylight, the scale of the operation became even clearer. The timber operation occupied the western section, massive stacks of logs, the sawmill building, various cutting and processing equipment. To the east sat what looked like a machine shop, forge fires already glowing. The river powered a water wheel that drove some of the machinery, its steady turning providing a rhythmic backdrop to the general noise of work. Men were everywhere, cutting, hauling, building, repairing. Most stopped to stare as Rowan and Clara passed. Some nodded respectfully to Rowan. None acknowledged Clara at all. The meeting took place in a building near the main house that served as both office and planning center. When Clara and Rowan entered, 5 men were already waiting. The conversation died immediately. "Gentlemen," Rowan said calmly, "this is my wife, Clara. She'll be sitting in on operations meetings from now on." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken objections. Clara kept her expression neutral, took a seat at the table, and waited. One of the men, older, with a gray beard and shoulders like a bull, finally spoke. "Boss, no disrespect, but this is business talk, rough business. Maybe the lady would be more comfortable." "The lady will be managing accounts and supply logistics," Rowan interrupted. which means she needs to understand what resources each operation requires, what timeline pressures exist, and where bottlenecks develop. So she sits in. Anyone have a problem with that? The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. The bearded man subsided, but Clara could feel the resentment radiating from him, and at least two others. Good, Rowan continued. Let's start with the timber operation. Marcus? The man who responded was younger, lean, and intense. We're running behind on the Cascade Railroad contract. Lost 2 days to weather last week, and we've got equipment problems with the main steam donkey. Parts won't arrive until Friday at earliest. Can we work around it? Yeah, but it'll mean hand-cutting more than we planned. Slower, more labor-intensive. Do it. I want that contract completed on time. Rowan made a note. Thomas? The bearded man leaned forward. Mill's operating at capacity. We could take on additional contracts if we had the raw material, but we're already processing everything the cutting crews can supply. What about the Morrison Creek site? We cleared that 2 months ago. Still waiting on the access road. County's dragging their feet on the permit. Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. I'll handle the county. What else? The meeting continued for another hour, each foreman reporting on their respective operations. Clara listened carefully, trying to match names to faces and understand the interconnected nature of everything happening at Ironwood Ridge. The timber operation fed the mill. The mill produced lumber for external contracts and internal construction. The machine shop manufactured specialized equipment both for their own use and for sale. There was even a small blacksmith operation producing custom tools. But underneath the legitimate business talk, Clara sensed something else. Careful phrasing about certain shipments, vague references to special orders that didn't quite fit the pattern, and the way Rowan shut down certain questions suggested topics that weren't discussed in mixed company. As the meeting broke up, the bearded man, Thomas, approached Rowan directly. A word? Private? Rowan glanced at Clara. Go back to the house. Start reviewing last month's supply invoices. Look for patterns in pricing. See if we're overpaying anywhere. Clara nodded and left, but not before catching Thomas's expression. The older man didn't bother hiding his relief at her departure. She spent the rest of the morning in the study, surrounded by invoices and receipts. Mrs. Chen brought lunch on a tray, which Clara ate absently while working. The numbers were starting to tell stories. Fluctuating prices from certain suppliers, regular orders that seemed excessive for the operation's size, payments to entities she couldn't quite identify. Rowan didn't return until mid-afternoon. He found Clara with papers spread across the entire desk, 3 different ledgers open, and notes scrawled on a separate sheet. Found something? He asked. Several somethings. You're overpaying for basic supplies by at least 15%. The contractor you use for equipment transport is charging rates that don't match the distance or volume. And there are quarterly payments to something called Cascade Development Corporation that don't appear to have any corresponding service or product delivery. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down across from her. The supply overpayment is probably accurate. The transport contractor is my cousin, and I pay premium because he's reliable and doesn't ask questions. And Cascade Development is a legal entity I use for certain business purposes. What business purposes? The kind you don't need to know about yet. Rowan's tone wasn't harsh, just final. But you're right about the basic supplies. Can you find better pricing? Probably. I'd need to contact suppliers, negotiate terms. Do it. You have authority to make those arrangements. He paused. The men are talking about you being in the meeting this morning. I imagine they are. Thomas thinks you're a liability, says a woman has no business knowing operational details, that it makes us look weak. Clara set down her pen carefully. And what do you think? I think Thomas has run the mill for 12 years and doesn't like change, and I think he's going to have to get used to it. Rowan leaned back. But he's not entirely wrong that some of the men will see your presence as weakness on my part. Like I need my wife to hold my hand in business. So what do you want me to do? Disappear back into the kitchen? No, I want you to prove them wrong. Rowan's eyes were steady on hers. I didn't bring you here to hide you away, Clara. I brought you here because I need someone smart enough to see what I'm missing, organized enough to manage complexity, and tough enough not to break under pressure. If you can be that person, eventually the men will accept it. And if I can't? Then we both have a problem. Clara met his gaze. I'm not planning to fail, Rowan. Good. He stood. There's a supply run going down the mountain tomorrow.
This
3
story
wagons,
was posted
8 men,
on the channel
4-day
west
trip.
of Betrayal.
I want you to go with them.
Please do not repost it in
Clara
any form.
blinked. Why? Because you need to meet the suppliers face to face, establish relationships, show that you have authority to negotiate on behalf of Ironwood Ridge. He moved toward the door. And because the men need to see you're not afraid to do the hard parts of the job. Who's leading the supply run? Thomas. Of course it was. Clara felt a flutter of apprehension but pushed it down. What time do we leave? Dawn, pack light. You'll be sleeping rough most nights. And Clara? Rowan paused in the doorway. Thomas is a hard man, but he's not cruel. He won't make it easy on you, but he won't let anything happen to you either. He's too loyal to me for that. After he left, Clara sat staring at her notes. A 4-day trip into the mountains with 8 men who already resented her presence. It was a test, clearly. Probably for her as much as for them. She spent the evening preparing. Mrs. Chen helped her pack practical supplies, dried food, a bedroll, extra clothing suitable for rough travel. The older woman's expression suggested she knew exactly what Clara was walking into. Keep your wits about you, Mrs. Chen said as she helped Clara roll her belongings into a tight pack. The men will try to rattle you. They'll test boundaries, see if you scare easy. Don't give them the satisfaction. Have you dealt with this before? I'm the cook. They need me too much to cause trouble. Mrs. Chen's smile was thin. You're different. You're the boss's wife, which means you have power, but you're also a woman in their space. That makes some men nervous. Nervous men do stupid things. Clara absorbed this. Any specific advice? Don't try to be one of them. Don't try to prove you're tough by doing things you're not capable of. But don't back down when you know you're right, either. Mrs. Chen tied off the pack. And watch your back around a man named Garrett. He's on the supply crew. Young, thinks he's smarter than he is, doesn't like taking orders from anyone he sees as beneath him. Noted. Clara barely slept that night. She lay in the big bed, listening to the compound settle into nighttime quiet, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. This wasn't just about managing ledgers and ordering supplies. This was about surviving in a world that didn't want her there. The sky was just beginning to gray when Clara made her way to the wagon yard. 3 heavy freight wagons stood ready, horses already in harness. Men moved around them, checking equipment, loading final supplies. Thomas stood near the lead wagon, talking with a younger man Clara didn't recognize. When Thomas saw her, his expression went carefully blank. Mrs. Hale, wasn't sure you'd actually show. I said I would. Clara kept her voice level. Where do you want me? 3rd wagon. You'll ride with Danny and Garrett. Thomas gestured to the rear wagon, where the young stable hand from her first night stood next to a rangy man in his mid-20s with restless eyes. Garrett, presumably. Clara climbed up into the wagon bed without comment. Danny gave her a small, encouraging smile. Garrett didn't acknowledge her at all. The convoy rolled out just as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. The trail down from Ironwood Ridge was even more treacherous than the one Clara had climbed 2 days earlier, steeper, narrower, with switchbacks that made her stomach clench. The wagons creaked and groaned under their loads, the horses straining against the grade. No one spoke much for the first few hours. The work of managing the wagons took everyone's full concentration. But as the trail leveled out somewhat, and they made better time, the men began to relax, talk among themselves. Clara learned names and roles by listening. Besides Thomas, Danny, and Garrett, there was Marcus from the timber operation, 2 men named Frank and Joseph, who worked the mill, a quiet man called Chen, who handled the forge, and a youngster named William, who seemed to do whatever needed doing. They stopped for a brief meal around noon. Clara ate her portion quickly, aware of the men watching her when they thought she wasn't looking. Garrett in particular kept shooting her glances that made her skin prickle. So, Garrett said finally, his voice carrying across the small clearing where they'd stopped. Boss really sent his wife on a supply run. That's something. Problem with that? Thomas's voice was flat. No problem, just interesting. Garrett leaned back against a wagon wheel. Makes a man wonder what kind of supplies need the lady's personal attention. The implication was crude enough that several men shifted uncomfortably. Clara felt her face heat but kept her expression neutral. "The kind that costs money," she said calmly. "Since I'm managing accounts now, it makes sense to understand what we're buying and from whom." "Managing accounts," Garrett repeated. "That what they're calling it now?" Thomas stood up abruptly. "That's enough. Garrett, you've got problems with how the boss runs things. You take it up with him. Until then, keep your mouth shut." Garrett subsided, but the smirk on his face suggested the matter wasn't settled. They pushed on through the afternoon. The trail descended out of the high mountains into foothills thick with timber. As evening approached, Thomas called a halt near a creek with good grazing for the horses. "We camp here," he announced. "Standard watches, 2 men up at all times. Garrett and Frank, you've got first shift. Marcus and Joseph, you're second. Chen and William, third. Danny, you help Mrs. Hale set up her camp, then get some sleep." Clara started to protest that she could manage herself, but caught Danny's slight headshake and stayed quiet. The boy helped her spread her bedroll near the fire, but slightly apart from where the men were settling. Far enough for some privacy, close enough for safety. The evening meal was simple: salt pork, beans, hard bread. The men ate quickly and settled into quiet conversation around the fire. Clara sat slightly removed, aware that her presence changed the dynamic. They couldn't talk freely with a woman present, especially not the boss's wife. After a while, she retreated to her bedroll, though she didn't expect to sleep much. The ground was hard, the night sounds unfamiliar, and she could hear the men's low voices continuing long after she'd closed her eyes. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to urgent whispers and the sound of someone moving too close to her bedroll. Clara went very still, eyes cracked barely open. Garrett stood a few feet away, his back to her, talking with Frank. "Just saying, boss sends a woman out here, he's asking for trouble. What's she gonna do when we need to negotiate hard with suppliers? Bat her eyes?" "You're being an ass," Frank said quietly. "Boss knows what he's doing." "Does he? Or is he thinking with something other than his head?" Clara had heard enough. She sat up, making both men jump. "I'm thinking you should worry less about what the boss is thinking and more about whether you'll still have a job when we get back." Garrett spun around. For a second, something ugly crossed his face. Then he forced a smile. "Didn't mean to wake you, ma'am." "You didn't wake me. I was listening." Clara stood, wrapped her blanket around her shoulders. "Let me make something clear. I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask for any of this. But I am here, and I'm going to do the job Rowan gave me. You can either accept that, or you can make yourself miserable resisting it. But it's not going to change the outcome." "Big talk," Garrett said. "Not talk. Fact." Clara met his eyes steadily. "Now, unless you're assigned to this watch shift, I suggest you get some sleep. We've got a long day tomorrow." She sat back down, pulled the blanket tighter, and waited. After a long moment, Garrett walked away. Frank lingered. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "some of us think it's good the boss finally brought someone up to help with the books. Thomas is a decent foreman, but he's not much for organization." "Thank you," Clara said, surprised. Frank nodded and returned to his post. Clara lay back down, her heart hammering. She'd just challenged Garrett directly, in front of another man. That would have consequences, but backing down would have been worse. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. Long hours on the trail, brief stops, tense meals, and Garrett finding small ways to make things difficult. He'd forget to save her water at a stream crossing. He'd load supplies in a way that left her no comfortable place to sit in the wagon. He'd make comments just loud enough for her to hear, but quiet enough to give him plausible deniability. Thomas didn't intervene directly, but Clara noticed he started assigning Garrett to tasks that kept him separated from her. That was something, at least. On the third evening, they reached Millerville, a logging town larger than Pinewood Hollow, but with the same air of barely controlled chaos. Thomas led them directly to a supply warehouse on the edge of town. "This is Jacobson's, but," Thomas told Clara. "We source most of our basic supplies here, hardware, tools, some provisions. Owner's name is Samuel Jacobson. Fair man, mostly, but he'll charge what he thinks he can get away with." "How long have you been buying from him?" 4 years, maybe 5. "And you've negotiated pricing?" Thomas shrugged. "Boss set the terms initially. We've just maintained them." Clara filed that away. I'd like to meet him. Jacobson turned out to be a heavy-set man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and the hearty manner of someone used to making deals. He greeted Thomas warmly, then turned his attention to Clara
This story
with
was
undisguised
posted on the
curiosity.
channel west of Betrayal.
Thomas tells me you're
Please
Hale's
do
new
not
wife,
repost it in any
Jacobson said.
form.
Congratulations. He's a good man, even if he drives a hard bargain. Thank you, Clara said. I'm also managing purchasing now for Ironwood Ridge. I wanted to introduce myself and review our current arrangements. Something shifted in Jacobson's expression, a calculation. Of course. I've got all your records in the office. Shall we? The office was cramped and cluttered, smelling of tobacco and old paper. Jacobson pulled out a thick ledger and began walking through their standard orders. Clara listened carefully, comparing the prices he quoted to what she'd seen in Rowan's books. These prices, Clara said finally, pointing to a list of hardware items, they're 15 to 20% higher than what I've seen other operations paying. Jacobson blinked. Well now, you have to consider transport costs, the remote location. I'm considering them. I'm also considering that we're a large, consistent customer who pays promptly and in full. That should command better rates, not worse. Mrs. Hale, with all respect, your husband and I have an arrangement, which I'm renegotiating, Clara said calmly. I need 10% reduction across the board on hardware and tools, 15% on bulk dry goods, and better terms on delivery timing. In return, we'll increase our order frequency and volume, which gives you more reliable cash flow. Jacobson sat back, his friendly demeanor slipping. That's quite a lot to ask. It's quite a lot of money we're spending. Clara met his eyes steadily. We're your third largest customer, Mr. Jacobson. I checked. Losing our business would hurt, but I'm not interested in going elsewhere if we can reach fair terms here. The negotiation took another 30 minutes. Jacobson tried various tactics, appealing to tradition, suggesting Clara didn't understand the market, implying that Rowan wouldn't appreciate her interfering. Clara held firm on her numbers, walked him through her analysis of fair pricing, and eventually threatened to visit his competitor across town. In the end, she got 8% reduction on hardware, 12% on dry goods, and a commitment to faster delivery on rush orders. Not everything she'd asked for, but substantial enough that Thomas, waiting outside, looked genuinely impressed when she explained the new terms. Boss is going to like that, he said grudgingly as they walked back to the wagons. We've been overpaying Jacobson for years. I know, Clara said. That's why I'm here. That night, around the campfire, the atmosphere was different. The men still didn't exactly welcome her, but there was less overt hostility. Marcus asked her about supplier negotiations. Frank wanted to know if she'd be reviewing their equipment contracts. Even William, the youngest, seemed more comfortable talking around her. Only Garrett remained sullenly silent, watching her with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. On the fourth day, they loaded the wagons with supplies and began the journey back up the mountain. The trail was even harder loaded, the horses straining, the men having to dismount and help push on the steepest grades. Clara pushed alongside them, adding her weight to the effort, earning grudging nods from some of the crew. They made it back to Ironwood Ridge late in the evening, everyone exhausted. Rowan was waiting in the yard as the wagons rolled in. His eyes found Clara immediately, scanning her for injury or distress. All good? He asked as she climbed down stiffly. All good, Clara confirmed. I renegotiated our terms with Jacobson. We're saving about 12% overall on basic supplies. Rowan's eyebrows rose slightly. In one meeting, he was overcharging. I corrected it. Something that might have been approval crossed Rowan's face. Come on, you look dead on your feet. Clara followed him to the house, where Mrs. Chen had hot water ready for washing and food waiting. Clara ate mechanically, too tired to taste it, and answered Rowan's questions about the trip in fragments. Thomas said you handled yourself well, Rowan said finally. That's high praise from him. Garrett still has a problem with me. Garrett has problems with everyone. Don't worry about him. Clara set down her fork. Rowan, what is this place? Really? I know there's legitimate business, the timber, the mill, the manufacturing, but there's something else underneath it. Payments that don't make sense, deliveries that aren't recorded properly, references to things people won't explain. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. How much do you really want to know? Enough to do my job properly. Enough to understand what I'm part of. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, but not tonight. Tonight you need to sleep. Tomorrow, I'll show you the rest of it. Clara slept harder than she had in weeks, exhaustion finally overtaking the anxiety that had become her constant companion. When she woke, the sun was already high, late morning, judging by the angle of light through the window. She dressed quickly, embarrassed to have slept so long, and went downstairs to find the house quiet. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen, as always, but the usual breakfast chaos had long since passed. He said to let you sleep, Mrs. Chen said before Clara could apologize. There's coffee and bread. He's waiting for you in the north warehouse when you're ready. Clara ate quickly, her stomach tight with nerves. The north warehouse. She'd noticed it during her tour of the compound, a substantial building set slightly apart from the others, with guards posted at the entrance even during the day. Whatever secrets Rowan kept, they lived there. She found him standing outside the building, talking with a man she didn't recognize. The stranger was older, well-dressed in a way that seemed out of place in the rough mountain setting. Tailored suit, polished boots, a gold watch chain visible at his vest. He looked like money, and the kind that didn't get its hands dirty. Rowan saw her approaching and wrapped up the conversation quickly. The well-dressed man tipped his hat to Clara as he passed, his eyes assessing her with the same calculation she'd seen in Jacobson's gaze. Who was that? Clara asked. Investor. He doesn't matter right now. Rowan gestured toward the warehouse. Ready? I suppose I am. He led her inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, but as her eyes adjusted, Clara saw rows of equipment that looked nothing like standard timber operation supplies. Precision machinery, metalworking tools of a sophistication she'd never seen. And in the back, what appeared to be an entire weapons manufacturing setup, lathes, presses, finishing stations. We make guns, Rowan said flatly, watching her reaction. Custom rifles, specialized parts, ammunition components, high-quality, precision work. We supply private buyers, security companies, a few government contracts through intermediaries. Clara stared at the equipment, her mind racing. That's legal? Mostly. The manufacturing is legitimate. We have the proper licenses, pay the right fees. The gray area is some of our buyers. We don't always ask detailed questions about who's ultimately using what we produce. He moved deeper into the warehouse. And then there's this. He unlocked a door Clara hadn't noticed, revealing a smaller room lined with safes and locked cabinets. We also broker deals. So someone needs equipment they can't source through normal channels. We find it and move it for a percentage. Mining equipment that's been declared surplus but still works fine. Industrial machinery that's technically restricted for export, but not if you know the right customs officials. Information about land parcels, mineral rights, timber contracts that are about to come available. You're a middleman, Clara said slowly. I'm a man who understands that the official economy and the real economy don't always align, Rowan corrected. There are needs that exist and people willing to pay to have those needs met. I facilitate that, carefully, quietly, and very profitably. Clara walked along the row of safes, processing this. The timber operation, the mill, those are legitimate. Completely. They turn a decent profit, provide cover for the rest, and keep most of the workers employed in legal enterprise. Only about a dozen men know about this side of things. Thomas knows. Marcus knows. Chen runs the weapons manufacturing. The others work the timber and think that's the whole operation. And the payments I couldn't identify in the ledgers? Shell companies, holding entities, partners who prefer anonymity. I'll walk you through the real books, the ones I keep separately. Rowan leaned against a workbench. This is what I meant about discretion, Clara. What you do with this information determines whether you can stay here. If you can't handle it, if you're going to have moral objections or security concerns, tell me now. Clara turned to face him fully. Is anyone getting hurt by what you do? Not by my hand. What people do with equipment after they buy it, that's on them. Have you ever manufactured weapons you knew would be used to harm innocent people? I've manufactured weapons that could be used for anything, Rowan said carefully. Hunting, protection, crime, war. I can't control the application. I can only control the quality of the product. It was a dodge, but not an unreasonable one. Clara thought about the debt collectors who'd circled her father, men who operated within the law but with cruelty nonetheless. She thought about merchants in Pinewood Hollow who cheated customers because they could. Legal didn't mean moral, and illegal didn't mean wrong. "Show me the real books," she said. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed slightly.
This
He pulled
story
keys
was
from his
posted on the
pocket and
channel
unlocked
west
one of the
of Betrayal.
cabinets, revealing
Please do not
ledgers that
repost
looked
it in
similar
any
to the
form.
ones in the study, but with entirely different content. The scope of it was staggering. Rowan wasn't just running a mountain enterprise. He was operating a sophisticated network of manufacturing, brokerage, and information trading that stretched across 3 territories. The numbers were easily triple what the legitimate operations generated. "How long have you been doing this?" Clara asked, running her finger down a column of transactions. "My father started it. Small at first, just helping other operations source hard-to-find parts, making connections. I expanded it after he died. Brought in the weapons manufacturing, developed the brokerage side, built relationships with buyers who had real money." Rowan pulled out another ledger. "This is the current client list. Memorize the names and never write them down anywhere else." Clara spent the next 3 hours in that warehouse, learning the architecture of Rowan's hidden empire. He was meticulous, every transaction documented, every payment tracked, every risk calculated. It was illegal in spirit, if not always in letter, but it was also brilliantly organized. "Why tell me all this?" Clara asked finally. "You could have kept me in the dark, let me manage the surface business, and never know the rest." "Because I need someone I can trust with the complete picture," Rowan said. "Someone smart enough to spot problems before they become catastrophic, connected enough to the money flow to notice if something's off, and positioned as my wife so no one questions her access to sensitive information." He closed the ledger he'd been holding. "My father ran this alone, and it nearly killed him. The stress of managing both sides, keeping everything compartmentalized, never having anyone to strategize with. I'm not making that mistake. And you trust me with this? We've known each other less than a week. I trust that you're practical, that you understand survival sometimes means working in gray areas, that you're not going to burn down what keeps your father alive and your sister fed." Rowan met her eyes. "Am I wrong?" Clara thought about her answer carefully. Was she appalled by what Rowan did? Parts of it, yes. But was she appalled enough to walk away from the security it provided, the interesting work, the chance to be part of something larger than scraping by in a dying town? "No," she said quietly. "You're not wrong." "Good." Rowan gestured toward the door. "Then let's talk about the real problem I need your help solving." They walked back to the main house where Rowan pulled out a map and spread it across the desk in the study. It showed the mountain region, with Ironwood Ridge marked prominently and various other locations circled or annotated. "My uncle," Rowan said, tapping a location about 50 miles east. "Benjamin Hale. He runs a competing operation, smaller than mine, less sophisticated but established. When my father died, Benjamin expected to inherit at least part of this place. He didn't. The will was clear. Everything went to me. I'm guessing he didn't take that well. He spent the last 5 years trying to undermine me, spreading rumors with potential clients, attempting to poach workers, filing legal challenges to our permits and licenses. Most of it's been minor harassment, but lately he's escalated." Rowan pulled out a letter and handed it to Clara. The handwriting was aggressive, almost violent in its pressure on the page. The content was worse: accusations of fraud, illegal operations, and a threat to bring everything to the attention of territorial authorities unless Rowan agreed to cede 30% of Ironwood Ridge operations to Benjamin. "When did you receive this?" 2 weeks ago. 3 days before I went to Pinewood Hollow looking for a wife." Clara looked up sharply. "That's why you needed to get married, not for domestic help or company." "Partially why," Rowan admitted. "Benjamin's angle is that I'm unstable, reckless, running the business into the ground with no legitimate heirs or family structure. If I'm married, especially to someone who's actively involved in management, it undermines that narrative. So I'm a prop in your family dispute." "You're a partner in managing a complex operation," Rowan corrected. "The fact that it also serves a strategic purpose doesn't make it less real." Clara set down the letter, anger rising. "You should have told me this before I signed the contract." Would it have changed your decision? She wanted to say yes, wanted to claim she had enough pride to walk away from being used. But they both knew the truth. Her father's debts, Lenore's future, those needs would have overridden her objections then, just as they did now. "What's Benjamin planning?" she asked instead. "I don't know exactly, but he's scheduled a gathering in 3 weeks, a meeting of regional operators, investors, territorial business leaders. It's supposed to be about coordinating on railroad contracts and resource management. But I think he's going to make his move there, try to publicly challenge my control, maybe present evidence of illegal operations, force me into a position where I have to either capitulate or risk exposure. Can he actually prove anything illegal? If he's been careful, if he's gathered the right documentation, maybe. I've been careful too, but there are always traces, enough to cause serious problems even if it doesn't result in prosecution." Clara studied the map, thinking. Who's attending this gathering? About 40 people, timber operators, mine owners, railroad representatives, a few territorial officials, investors from back east, anyone with significant economic stake in the region. And Benjamin's hosting it? Co-hosting with the Territorial Commerce Association gives him a veneer of legitimacy. Clara's mind was already working through scenarios. You need to flip the narrative before he can deploy it, make him look like the unstable one, the one operating on emotion and grudges rather than sound business principle. Easier said than done. Benjamin's been building relationships for years. He's got allies in that room. But he doesn't have proof you're a competent manager who's grown this operation sustainably, Clara said. We have 3 weeks. Let me audit everything, the legitimate operations and the hidden ones. I'll build a comprehensive picture of financial health, growth trajectories, employment numbers, community investment. Then at this gathering, we don't hide, we present. We show every person in that room that Ironwood Ridge is the most professionally managed, most profitable, most strategically positioned operation in the territory. Rowan was quiet, considering. That's aggressive. It draws attention. Benjamin's already drawing attention. We can either let him control the narrative or we can seize it ourselves. Clara pulled the map closer. Who are the key players Benjamin's likely counting on for support? They spent the rest of the afternoon strategizing. Rowan walked Clara through the political landscape. Who owed whom favors? Which operations were struggling? Where territorial officials could be influenced? Clara took notes, asked questions, built a mental model of the ecosystem they were operating in. There's one more complication, Rowan said as evening approached. Garrett. Clara's stomach tightened. What about him? He's Benjamin's nephew, younger brother's son. Came to work here 2 years ago, claimed he wanted to learn from the best operation in the territory. I took him on because refusing would have looked petty, and I thought I could win him over. Rowan's expression was grim. Now I'm fairly certain he's been feeding information to Benjamin. Nothing critical, but enough to give Benjamin insight into our operations, our weak points. You're sure? Not completely, but the timing of some of Benjamin's moves suggests inside knowledge, and Garrett's the most likely source. Clara thought about Garrett's hostility on the supply run, his comments, his resentment. What are you going to do about him? Nothing yet. If I fire him without cause, it confirms Benjamin's narrative that I'm paranoid and unstable. But I need to limit his access, feed him information that serves our purposes. Rowan looked at Clara. This is dangerous territory. Benjamin's not just a business rival, he's family, which makes it personal and unpredictable. If you want to stay out of it, focus only on the operational side, I'd understand. Clara almost laughed. I negotiated my wedding contract, renegotiated supplier terms in my first week, and just learned my husband runs an illegal arms brokerage. I'm well past the point of staying out of dangerous territory. Something like respect crossed Rowan's face. All right then. Partners? Partners? Clara agreed. The next 3 weeks were a controlled frenzy. Clara threw herself into the audit with an intensity that surprised even her. She reviewed every ledger, legitimate and hidden. She interviewed foremen about operational efficiency, tracked supply chains, analyzed profit margins, and identified inefficiencies that had persisted simply because no one had looked closely enough. She also started making changes, small ones at first, reorganizing the inventory system to reduce waste, implementing better tracking for equipment maintenance, negotiating improved terms with additional suppliers. The men grumbled about the new procedures, but the results were undeniable. Within 2 weeks, they'd reduced supply costs by 18% and improved production timelines on key contracts. Thomas grudgingly admitted the improvements
This
were
story
working.
was posted on the
Marcus
channel
started bringing
west
her
of
problems
Betrayal.
directly
Please do
instead
not
of going
repost
through
it
Rowan.
in any form.
Even Chen, the taciturn weapons manufacturer, began seeking her input on procurement for the hidden operation. Garrett remained hostile, but Clara noticed Rowan had quietly shifted him to assignments that kept him away from sensitive areas. The younger man clearly knew something was wrong, which made him more volatile. "He's going to bolt," Clara told Rowan one evening as they reviewed her audit findings. "Run back to Benjamin and tell him everything he knows." "Let him. Most of what he knows is what we've let him see, and it will tell us for certain where his loyalties lie." "You're using him." "I'm managing a threat." Rowan marked a note on the financial projections Clara had prepared. "There's a difference." Clara had been sleeping in the big bedroom alone since her arrival, Rowan keeping to a smaller room down the hall. It was the arrangement they'd tacitly agreed to, married in name and law, but separate in practice. But the intensity of their work together, the long hours strategizing and planning, had created an intimacy that was harder to define. She'd learned he took his coffee black and strong, that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was tired, that he carried the weight of the operation with a control that was almost inhuman. She'd also learned he listened when she challenged him, that he valued competence over deference, and that underneath the calculated exterior was someone profoundly isolated by the secrets he carried. One night, working late in the study, Clara asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why didn't you just marry someone from up here? Someone who already knew the operation? Who wouldn't need all this explanation and integration?" Rowan looked up from the ledger he'd been reviewing. "Because everyone up here has existing loyalties, existing relationships, existing agendas. You came in clean. You owed nothing to anyone here except me. That's worth more than familiarity. I'm still an outsider. For now, that changes." He set down his pen. "You've already changed it more than you realize. The men talk about you differently now." "Still not sure what to make of you, but respectful. That matters." "Even Garrett?" "Garrett's a lost cause, but he doesn't speak for the others." The gathering was set for a Friday in late November at the territorial capital, a full day's journey from Ironwood Ridge. Rowan and Clara would travel with Thomas and Marcus, leaving the operation in Chen's capable hands. Clara spent the week before departure preparing materials, financial summaries, production reports, strategic plans for expansion. Everything designed to present Ironwood Ridge as a model of professional management. 2 days before they were scheduled to leave, Garrett disappeared. Thomas discovered it at the morning meeting. His bunks cleared out, took his personal gear, one of the horses, left sometime after midnight watch. "Going to Benjamin," Rowan said flatly. "You want me to send someone after him?" Thomas asked. "No, let him run." Rowan looked at Clara. "This changes the timeline. Benjamin knows we're coming prepared now. He'll adjust his approach." "Or he'll panic and overplay his hand," Clara said. "Either way, we proceed as planned." They left the following morning. The journey to the capital was cold but clear, the road better maintained than the mountain trails. Clara used the travel time to review her materials again, anticipating arguments, preparing responses. The capital was a rough-edged town trying desperately to look civilized. Proper buildings mixed with temporary structures, muddy streets attempting to pass as boulevards, prosperity and desperation existing side by side. The gathering was being held at the Grand Union Hotel, the largest building in town, and the only one with a meeting hall of sufficient size. They arrived the evening before the gathering, checking into rooms Rowan had reserved weeks ago. Clara barely slept, her mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. The meeting hall was already half full when they arrived the next morning. Men in varying degrees of formal dress stood in clusters, talking, dealing, positioning themselves. Clara spotted Benjamin immediately. He looked like Rowan but softer, with the same angular features but less control in his expression. He was talking animatedly with a group that included a man wearing a territorial official's insignia. Benjamin's eyes found them across the room. For a moment, naked hatred flashed across his face before he schooled it into a cold smile. He said something to the men around him, then began making his way over. "Rowan," he said, his voice carrying false warmth. Good of you to attend. I wasn't sure you'd have the time, what with the challenges your operation's been facing. No challenges, Rowan said evenly. Business is strong. Of course, of course. Benjamin's attention shifted to Clara, and his smile grew sharper. And this must be the wife I've been hearing about. How charming that you've brought her along. Does she take notes for you? Clara felt Rowan tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. Actually, I manage operations and strategic planning for Ironwood Ridge. Rowan values having a partner who understands the complete scope of the enterprise. How progressive, Benjamin said, the word dripping condescension. Though I wonder if investors and officials really want to conduct serious business with a woman present. No offense, of course. None taken, Clara said smoothly. I'm sure some men find competent women threatening. Fortunately, most of the people here today are more concerned with results than outdated prejudices. A few men nearby had started paying attention to the exchange. Benjamin's smile went rigid. Well, we'll see what the day brings, won't we? He walked away. Rowan exhaled slowly. You just made yourself a target. I was already a target the moment I married you, Clara said. Might as well make it worthwhile. The formal gathering began at 10. The Territorial Commerce Director, a politician named Harrison Wells, called the meeting to order and outlined the day's agenda. Updates from major operations, discussion of railroad contract coordination, review of territorial infrastructure needs, standard business, presented in standard ways. Benjamin gave the first major presentation, outlining his operations capabilities and positioning himself as a reasonable, experienced operator concerned with regional stability. It was smooth, practiced, and designed to establish him as the responsible party in the room. Then he pivoted. Of course, not all operations in the territory maintain the same standards of professionalism and transparency. Some prioritize profit over community responsibility. Some operate in ways that raise questions about regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The room went very still. Harrison Wells frowned. Benjamin, if you have specific concerns about regulatory violations, there are proper channels. I'm not making accusations, Benjamin said quickly. I'm simply noting that as we discuss coordination and cooperation, we need to ensure all parties are operating with appropriate oversight and accountability. For instance, operations that expand too quickly without proper infrastructure, or that make unusual personnel decisions that suggest instability in leadership. He was looking directly at Rowan as he said it. Clara felt her pulse quicken. This was it, the opening salvo. Benjamin was laying groundwork, planting seeds of doubt without making concrete claims that could be challenged. Several voices erupted at once, some supporting Benjamin's call for accountability, others defending their own operations against implied criticism. Harrison Wells called for order, suggested they table the discussion and move to scheduled presentations. Actually, Clara said, standing up. Her voice cut through the noise. I think Benjamin raises an excellent point about transparency and accountability. Perhaps Ironwood Ridge should set the standard. Every eye in the room turned to her. Rowan looked up sharply but didn't intervene. I'm Clara Hale, she continued, moving to the front of the room. I've spent the last month conducting a comprehensive operational audit of Ironwood Ridge. I'd be happy to share our findings with this group. Complete financial transparency, operational metrics, growth strategies, community investment, everything Benjamin suggests we should all aspire to. Benjamin's expression went from confident to uncertain. I wasn't suggesting. You weren't suggesting operations should be transparent and accountable? Clara asked innocently. My apologies, I must have misunderstood. Harrison Wells leaned forward. Mrs. Hale, this is somewhat irregular, but if you've prepared materials, the Assembly would certainly be interested in reviewing them. Clara had prepared materials, detailed, comprehensive, carefully designed materials that Thomas and Marcus now distributed to everyone in the room. Financial summaries showing consistent growth, profit margins that exceeded industry standards, employment numbers that demonstrated community impact, strategic plans that outlined sustainable expansion. She walked them through it systematically, answering questions about supply chain management, production efficiency, labor relations. She presented Ironwood Ridge as exactly what it was, the most professionally managed, most strategically sound operation in the territory. Of course, we're always looking to improve, Clara concluded. If other operations would be willing to share their own metrics, we could establish
This
regional
story was
benchmarks,
posted on the
coordinate
channel
on
west
best
of
practices.
Betrayal. Please do
Unless
not repost
transparency
it
is only
in
a
any
concern
form.
when it applies to others. The last comment was directed at Benjamin, whose face had gone dark with suppressed rage. He'd been outmaneuvered and everyone in the room knew it. The afternoon session was almost anticlimactic. Other operators gave their presentations, but the standard had been set. Several approached Rowan during breaks, expressing interest in coordination and learning from Ironwood Ridge's systems. The territorial officials looked pleased. Finally, operations that presented themselves professionally, that could be held up as examples of responsible commerce. Benjamin tried to regain ground, raised questions about the speed of Ironwood Ridge's growth, suggested it wasn't sustainable. But Clara had anticipated every argument, had data and projections ready. By the end of the day, Benjamin looked like a bitter relative making petty attacks, while Rowan and Clara looked like the future of territorial business. As the gathering broke up, Harrison Wells pulled Rowan aside. "Impressive presentation. Your wife's quite an asset." "She is," Rowan agreed. "We're going to be monitoring operations more closely going forward, not suspiciously, just good governance. But based on what you've shown today, I don't anticipate any concerns." Wells lowered his voice. "Between us, Benjamin's been pushing for increased scrutiny of your operation for months. This rather undercut his position. I doubt he'll have much credibility with territorial oversight going forward." After Wells walked away, Rowan turned to Clara. "You ambushed him." "I responded to his concerns with transparency," Clara said. "Exactly what he claimed to want. You destroyed him in front of everyone who matters. I protected our operation." "There's a difference." Clara gathered her materials, though I admit it felt good to watch his face when he realized he'd been outplayed. Rowan almost smiled. "Remind me never to underestimate you." They found Benjamin outside, standing alone near the stables, his expression murderous. He saw them approaching and straightened, clearly preparing for confrontation. "Clever," he spat, "bringing in your pet accountant to lie for you." "Everything Clara presented was factual and verifiable," Rowan said calmly. "You're welcome to audit our books yourself if you question the numbers. I question everything about how you run that place. Our father built it with integrity, and you've turned it into a successful enterprise that employs dozens of people and generates substantial revenue," Rowan interrupted. "What have you built, Benjamin? A smaller operation that you're trying to grow by tearing down competitors rather than improving your own performance?" Benjamin took a step forward. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Clara said quietly. "You lost today. You lost credibility, leverage, and any chance of using territorial oversight to attack us. The smart move now is to focus on your own operation and leave Ironwood Ridge alone. I don't take strategic advice from women who married into money they didn't earn." "Then take it from your nephew," Clara shot back. "Garrett's been feeding you information for 2 years. How much of it was actually useful? How much of your intelligence about Ironwood Ridge came from a resentful kid who saw what he wanted to see?" She paused, letting that sink in. "We knew about him. We managed what he could access. Every piece of information he gave you was filtered through us first." It was a bluff. They hadn't controlled Garrett that completely. But the doubt that crossed Benjamin's face suggested the bluff had landed. "Stay away from Ironwood Ridge," Rowan said. "Stay away from my workers, my suppliers,
This story was
my
posted
business.
on the channel west
You
of
try this
Betrayal.
again, I won't respond
Please
with
do not
presentations
repost
and
it
data.
in any
I'll
form.
respond with lawyers and formal complaints about industrial sabotage. Are we clear?" Benjamin stared at them both for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. Clara watched him go, her heart hammering. They'd won. Not just the day, but the larger battle. Benjamin had been neutralized as a threat, at least for now. "That was dangerous," Rowan said quietly. "What you did in there? You painted a target on yourself." "The target was already there," Clara said. "I just made sure everyone could see I'm not an easy mark." They returned to Ironwood Ridge 2 days later, the journey feeling shorter somehow. Word had spread ahead of them, how the boss's new wife had systematically dismantled Benjamin Hale's challenge, how Ironwood Ridge had emerged from the territorial gathering as the model operation everyone else would be measured against. The men's attitude shifted noticeably. Not warmth exactly, but respect. Recognition that Clara had earned her place through competence and strategy rather than just marriage. Even Thomas offered grudging approval. "You handled that well. Benjamin won't recover from the embarrassment anytime soon." Clara settled back into the rhythm of managing the operation, but now with authority that no one questioned. She implemented more changes, streamlined processes, found efficiencies. The legitimate business grew steadily. The hidden operation continued to thrive, with Clara managing the complex logistics that kept it functioning smoothly. Winter closed in around Ironwood Ridge, snow sealing them into the mountain valley for weeks at a time. Clara and Rowan worked side by side through the long, dark months, building something neither of them had expected, a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. The snow had just begun to melt when the letter arrived. Clara was in the study, working through equipment contracts, when Danny appeared at the door looking nervous. "Mrs. Hale, there's a rider from the territorial office. Says he needs to see you and the boss. Urgent." Clara found Rowan in the machine shop, inspecting a new lathe that had arrived the previous week. His expression shifted when she relayed the message. Not quite alarmed, but something close. The territorial courier was a young man who looked half frozen, clutching his satchel like it contained explosives. He handed Rowan an official envelope with the territorial seal. Rowan read it in silence, his face going carefully blank in a way that made Clara's stomach clench. When he finally looked up, his voice was controlled. "It seems Harrison Wells wants to conduct an official inspection of Ironwood Ridge. He'll be arriving in 2 weeks with a small delegation. To verify the operational standards we presented at the gathering." The courier shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Wells wanted me to emphasize this is a courtesy inspection, not an investigation. He was very clear about that." "Of course," Rowan said smoothly. He pulled out coins to pay the courier's fee, added extra for the difficult ride up the mountain. "Tell Mr. Wells we'll be prepared to receive him and provide full cooperation." After the courier left, Clara followed Rowan back to the house. He waited until they were in the study with the door closed before speaking. "This is Benjamin's doing. You think he convinced Wells to inspect us?" "Not convinced, pressured. Wells probably had no choice politically. After the gathering, if he doesn't follow up on our transparency claims, it looks like favoritism." Rowan paced to the window. "Benjamin's betting we can't maintain the illusion under close scrutiny, that Wells will find something that contradicts what you presented." Clara's mind was already racing through the implications. The weapons manufacturing, the brokerage operations, everything in the North Warehouse has to disappear, completely, before they arrive. 2 weeks isn't much time to relocate that kind of operation. "No," Rowan agreed, "but it's what we have." They spent the rest of the day planning. The manufacturing equipment could be dismantled and moved to a secondary location Rowan owned deeper in the mountains, an old mining site that still had structures suitable for temporary storage. The current inventory of finished weapons and specialty items would be distributed to buyers immediately, even at discount prices. The sensitive ledgers and documentation would be secured in locations no inspection would reach. That left the men who knew about the hidden operations: Chen, Marcus, Thomas, and about 8 others who worked the manufacturing side. "They need to disappear too," Rowan said that evening. "Wells can't meet anyone who might slip up under questioning. We need the compound operating with only people who genuinely believe Ironwood Ridge is exactly what we presented, a timber and milling operation." "Where will they go?" "The mining site with the equipment. They can start setting up the new manufacturing location. We've been planning to expand anyway. This just accelerates the timeline." Clara studied the list of names. "What about Garrett?" Rowan's expression went cold. "What about him?" "He ran to Benjamin. He knows about the weapons operation. If Wells talks to him, Wells won't talk to him. Garrett doesn't work here anymore. But he knows things. And if Benjamin puts him in front of Wells, has him make claims about illegal operations, it's Garrett's word against our documented records, our books, everything you presented at the gathering." Rowan leaned back in his chair. "And Garrett has credibility problems. He was fired for poor performance and theft. Ask Thomas, that's the official story. Anything he says sounds like revenge from a disgruntled worker." "Was he actually fired for theft?" "He will have been once Thomas updates the employment records." Rowan met her eyes. "This is how it works, Clara. You create
This
the
story was
reality you
posted
need
on
to
the channel
exist.
west
Facts
of
are
Betrayal.
negotiable if you
Please
control
do
the
not repost
documentation.
it in any form.
It was a cold calculation, but Clara couldn't argue with the logic. Still, something nagged at her. Benjamin won't just rely on Garrett. He'll have other moves planned. Undoubtedly, which is why we need to be perfect. No mistakes, no loose ends, nothing that gives Wells reason to dig deeper. The next 2 weeks were controlled chaos. Chen and his crew dismantled the weapons operation with surgical precision, moving equipment in the dead of night to wagons that departed before dawn. The North Warehouse was stripped, cleaned, and restocked with legitimate lumber processing equipment that gave every appearance of having been there for years. New workers were hired to replace the men who'd left, young, eager, with no knowledge of anything beyond timber and milling. Clara conducted the interviews herself, choosing carefully, looking for people who'd present well to territorial officials. The books were scrubbed and rescrubbed until every transaction could be traced to a legitimate source. Clara created redundant documentation, backup ledgers, reference materials that would survive even aggressive auditing. She also drilled everyone who would interact with the inspection team, how to answer questions, what to emphasize, what topics to redirect. Thomas grumbled about the rehearsals, but even he admitted the preparation was necessary. Wells isn't stupid, Thomas said during one evening session. He's going to look for exactly the kind of thing we're hiding. Then we make sure there's nothing to find, Clara said. And we make sure everyone here believes in the story we're telling, because it is true. We run a professional timber operation that treats workers fairly and generates legitimate profit. Everything else is irrelevant to the inspection. Mrs. Chen approached Clara privately 3 days before Wells was scheduled to arrive. You're taking a risk, letting the boss hide all that other business. If Wells finds out you lied, you're the one who presented those numbers at the gathering. You're the one who'll look dishonest. I presented accurate numbers, Clara said carefully. Everything I showed was real. I just didn't mention things that weren't relevant to the conversation. Lies of omission are still lies. Maybe, but they're the lies that keep this place running, that keep 40 families fed, that keep my father alive and my sister housed. Clara met Mrs. Chen's eyes. I've made my choice. I can live with the consequences. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. Just make sure you can, because consequences have a way of arriving when you least expect them. Harrison Wells arrived exactly on schedule, accompanied by 2 assistants and a territorial land agent Clara didn't recognize. Rowan and Clara met them at the compound entrance, professional and welcoming. Mr. Wells, thank you for making the journey, Rowan said, shaking hands. We're pleased to show you around Ironwood Ridge. Wells was cordial but businesslike. I appreciate your cooperation. As I indicated in my letter, this is a routine verification of the operational standards you outlined at the gathering. Nothing adversarial. Of course, Clara said, we've prepared detailed documentation and arranged for you to tour all our facilities, speak with workers, review whatever records you'd like to examine. The inspection began that afternoon. Wells and his team toured the timber operation first, watching the cutting crews work, examining the steam donkey equipment, reviewing safety procedures. Thomas guided them through the mill, explaining the processing workflow, production capacity, quality controls. Everything was exactly as Clara had described at the gathering. The numbers matched, the systems functioned as documented, the workers spoke
This
confidently
story
about
was
their
posted
roles
on
in
the channel
operations
west of
management.
Betrayal.
Wells
Please
took
do not
extensive
repost
notes,
it
but
in any
asked
form.
relatively straightforward questions. His assistants were more aggressive, probing for inconsistencies, but found none. By the end of the first day, the inspection team seemed almost disappointed at how thoroughly legitimate everything appeared. Tomorrow I'd like to review your financial records in detail, Wells said over dinner that evening, particularly the supply chain management and contract fulfillment documentation. Of course, Clara said, I've prepared summaries organized by category, with supporting documentation cross-referenced. You'll have complete access to everything. The second day was more intensive. Wells and his senior assistant spent hours in the study, going through ledgers line by line, comparing invoices to shipment records, verifying that payments matched services rendered. Clara sat with them, answering questions, providing context, explaining decisions. The assistant, a sharp-eyed man named Porter, kept looking for the crack in the facade. These profit margins seem exceptionally high for a timber operation of this scale. What accounts for the efficiency? Several factors, Clara said, pulling out her analysis. We've optimized our supply chain to reduce waste, negotiated better terms with suppliers, implemented equipment maintenance protocols that minimize downtime, and hired skilled workers we compensate well enough to retain. The upfront investment in quality systems pays for itself in reduced long-term costs. And you implemented these systems when you arrived? I identified inefficiencies and proposed solutions. Rowan made the decisions to implement them. It's been a collaborative process. Porter made notes, clearly skeptical but unable to identify specific problems. They moved through category after category: payroll, equipment purchases, contract revenues, operational expenses. Everything matched what Clara had presented at the gathering. It was late afternoon when Porter found something. He'd been reviewing the transportation contracts, comparing rates and distances, when he paused. This contractor, Hale Transport Services. That's a family connection? Rowan's cousin runs that company, Clara acknowledged. And you pay them premium rates. Isn't that a conflict of interest? Oh, it's a business decision based on reliability and discretion, Clara said calmly. We've compared rates with other contractors. Yes, we pay slightly more, but we also get priority service, flexible scheduling, and a relationship with someone who understands the unique challenges of mountain transportation. The premium is justified by the value provided. Convenient that your husband's cousin profits from your business. Convenient that we have a transportation partner we can trust absolutely, Clara corrected. Would you prefer we use cheaper contractors who might be unreliable or who might discuss our shipping schedules with competitors? Wells, who'd been listening, intervened. Mr. Porter, unless you have evidence of actual impropriety, business relationships with family aren't illegal. Many operations use trusted connections for sensitive services. Porter backed down, but Clara could see he wasn't satisfied. He wanted to find something wrong, something that would validate whatever suspicions had driven this inspection. On the third day, Wells requested to speak with workers privately, without management present. Clara and Rowan agreed immediately. They'd prepared everyone carefully, and confidence was more convincing than hesitation. Wells selected workers randomly, interviewing them in the main office while Clara and Rowan waited outside. Through the window, Clara could see the conversations, could read body language even if she couldn't hear words. The workers looked comfortable, answered questions directly, showed no signs of nervousness or evasion. After the interviews, Wells emerged looking thoughtful. Your workers speak highly of the operation. They feel fairly compensated, safely managed, and optimistic about the future. That's our goal, Rowan said. A well-treated workforce is a productive workforce. Yes? Well. Wells consulted his notes. I do have one final area I'd like to explore. I understand you maintain a warehouse facility that wasn't included in our tour yesterday. Clara's heart skipped, but she kept her expression neutral. The North Warehouse? It's primarily storage for processed lumber and equipment staging. We didn't include it because there's not much to see, just inventory waiting for shipment. Nevertheless, I'd like to see it. Of course, Rowan said smoothly. This way. They walked to the North Warehouse, Clara's mind racing. They'd cleaned it completely, restocked it with legitimate materials. There was nothing illegal there anymore. But if Wells looked closely enough, if he noticed anything that suggested recent reorganization, recent changes. Rowan unlocked the main door and they entered. The space was well lit now, organized into neat sections of lumber, tools, equipment, everything a legitimate operation would store. Wells walked through slowly, examining stacks, checking labels, occasionally asking about specific items. His assistants spread out, investigating corners, looking behind tarps, clearly searching for something hidden. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. After 20 minutes, Wells seemed to accept the warehouse was exactly what Clara had described, mundane storage. Porter, however, was looking at the floor. These marks here, recent, aren't they? He was pointing to faint scrapes in the concrete where heavy equipment had been moved during the cleanup. Clara's pulse quickened. We reorganized the layout last month, she said calmly. It was inefficient. We were storing items in ways that made retrieval difficult, wasting time. I designed a new organization system and we implemented it. Before or after the territorial gathering? After. I identified the inefficiency during my operational audit, but we didn't have time to address it before the gathering. It was on the list of improvements to implement over winter. Porter knelt down, examining the marks more closely. Seems like a lot of heavy equipment was moved. Because there was, Clara said. We relocated the steam donkey maintenance station from this building to the machine shop, moved lumber processing tools closer to the mill, consolidated storage to maximize space efficiency. It was significant work, but the improved workflow has already increased our productivity. Wells was watching this exchange carefully. Do you have documentation of this reorganization? Clara had anticipated this question. She pulled out papers she'd prepared, work orders, equipment inventories before and after, productivity metrics showing improvement, all created in the last 2 weeks, but dated and formatted to look like standard operational documentation. Wells reviewed the papers while Porter continued examining the warehouse. The assistant was clearly frustrated, convinced something wasn't right, but unable to identify what. Finally, Wells handed the documents back. This all appears in order. They finished the tour and returned to the main house. Wells and his team spent the evening reviewing their notes, consulting privately. Clara and Rowan waited, maintaining calm exteriors while tension coiled between them. The next morning, Wells delivered his preliminary findings over breakfast. Based on our inspection, Ironwood Ridge appears to operate consistent with the standards you outlined at the territorial gathering. Your financial documentation is comprehensive and accurate. Your workers are well treated and properly compensated. Your facilities are professionally managed and maintained. Clara felt relief wash through her, but kept her expression neutral. Wells continued. However, I want to be clear. This inspection was necessarily limited in scope and duration. We verified what we could verify in 3 days. That doesn't mean irregularities don't exist, only that we haven't found them. Understood, Rowan said. We welcome further scrutiny at any time. I'm sure you do. Wells set down his coffee cup. I'll be honest with you both. I received pressure to conduct this inspection from parties who believe Ironwood Ridge operates in ways that wouldn't survive close examination. I found no evidence to support those claims, but I also found no evidence to definitively refute them. What are you saying? Clara asked. I'm saying my official report will state that Ironwood Ridge meets territorial standards for business operation and poses no regulatory concerns based on current evidence. However, I'm also saying that if evidence emerges in the future, if someone produces documentation or testimony of illegal activities, this inspection won't protect you. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, Rowan said. Wells stood, signaling the meeting was over. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be departing within the hour. After the inspection team left, Clara and Rowan stood in the yard, watching the riders disappear down the mountain trail. Neither spoke for several minutes. That was close, Clara said finally. Too close. Porter knew something was off. He just couldn't prove it. Do you think Wells knows? I think Wells is a smart man who understands how frontier economies actually work. He knows there's always more happening than what's documented. But as long as we maintain plausible deniability and don't create obvious problems, he's willing to look the other way. Rowan turned to face her. We need to be more careful. Benjamin's not going to stop. And now he knows we can survive official scrutiny. His next move will be different. Clara nodded, but her mind was already elsewhere.
This story was posted on the channel west
about the
of
marks on the
Betrayal.
warehouse floor.
Please do not
about how
repost
close
it
they'd
in
come
any
to
form.
exposure. They'd passed this test, but the cost had been significant. Relocating the weapons operation, disrupting production, living under intense scrutiny for days. We can't keep doing this, she said. We can't keep running the hidden operation the way we have been. It's too vulnerable, too dependent on secrecy that becomes harder to maintain every time someone looks closely. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we need to legitimize it, find ways to bring the profitable parts into legal territory, or at least into gray areas that are defensible if challenged. Rowan was quiet, considering. That's a fundamental restructuring. It would take months, maybe years, and it would mean giving up some of the most lucrative contracts, the ones that depend on operating outside normal channels. But it would also mean we're not constantly vulnerable to exposure. We're not dependent on hiding major parts of our business. We can focus on building something sustainable instead of just protecting secrets. You're talking about transforming the entire operation. I'm talking about evolution, Clara said. Benjamin tried to destroy us with territorial oversight. He failed, but only barely. Next time, the attack will come from a different angle. We need to be positioned so that exposure isn't catastrophic, so that we can weather scrutiny without having to dismantle half our business. Rowan studied her face. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else since Wells sent that letter. Clara wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. I didn't marry you to spend my life looking over my shoulder, Rowan. I didn't learn this business to watch it collapse the first time someone digs too deep. If we're building something here, let's build it to last. Over the next weeks, Clara developed what she called the legitimization plan. It was comprehensive, radical, and would fundamentally change how Ironwood Ridge operated. The weapons manufacturing would transition to specialty industrial equipment production. Still precision metalwork, still valuable, but for civilian applications that didn't require the same secrecy. The brokerage operation would become a consulting service, connecting buyers with suppliers for hard-to-source equipment through documented channels that might bend regulations but didn't break them outright. The shell companies would be consolidated into a proper holding structure that provided legal protection without requiring deception. It meant lower profit margins on some operations. It meant losing customers who required absolute secrecy. It meant exposure to more regulation and oversight. But it also meant stability, sustainability, a business that could grow openly instead of hiding in shadows. Rowan resisted initially. My father built this operation on the principle that the real money exists outside official channels. You're proposing we abandon that. I'm proposing we adapt it, Clara corrected. Your father operated in a different era, when territorial oversight was minimal and exposure risk was low. That's changed. Every year, there's more regulation, more scrutiny, more risk. We either evolve or we eventually get caught. They argued about it for days. Rowan saw it as surrendering the advantage that had made Ironwood Ridge profitable. Clara saw it as ensuring they'd still exist in 5 years. The breakthrough came when she showed him the numbers. Even with reduced profit margins from going legitimate, they'd still outperform every other operation in the territory. They'd just do it sustainably, defensibly, without constant vulnerability. And if Benjamin attacks again, Rowan asked, then we have nothing to hide. He can bring Wells up here monthly if he wants. He can file all the complaints he can imagine. We'll be clean. Rowan stared at her projections for a long time. Finally, he nodded. All right, we do it your way. But if this fails, if we end up weaker instead of stronger, then you can say you told me so, Clara said. But it's not going to fail. The transformation began immediately. Chen's crew started retooling for industrial equipment manufacturing. Marcus began reaching out to new clients for legitimate contracts. Clara restructured the corporate holdings, working with lawyers to create defensible frameworks. It was exhausting, complex work that consumed every waking hour. But slowly, the operation transformed. The hidden elements didn't disappear. Some things would always require discretion, but they became smaller, more manageable, less existentially threatening if exposed. 3 months after Wells's inspection, Clara received a letter from Lenora. Their father's health had stabilized with the ongoing medical care, though he'd never fully recover. Lenora had used her allowance to take teaching certification courses and secured a position at a proper school in a larger town. The letter ended with a question. Are you happy, Clara? I know you made this choice for us, but I hope you found something for yourself, too. Clara read the letter sitting in the study, surrounded by the ledgers and documents that had become her world. Was she happy? The question felt almost absurd given everything that had happened. The forced marriage, the deception, the constant strategic maneuvering. But as she considered it honestly, she realized the answer was complicated. She wasn't happy the way she'd imagined happiness as a girl, with simple affection, easy companionship, uncomplicated love. But she was engaged in a way she'd never been before, challenged, respected, building something substantial. And Rowan. Their relationship had evolved into something she didn't have words for. Not love exactly, but partnership, trust, a sense of being matched with someone who understood her capabilities and valued them. She was writing a response to Lenora when Rowan entered the study. He looked tired, They'd been pushing hard on the restructuring, but also energized in a way she hadn't seen before. "Just got word from our new equipment buyer," he said. "Major contract for mining machinery. Legitimate, profitable, and it opens up an entire new market segment." "That's excellent. It's because of you, your plan, your strategy." Rowan sat down across from her. "I fought you on this, but you were right. We're building something better than what existed before." Clara set down her pen. "We're building it together." "Yes," Rowan agreed. "We are." There was a moment of silence, weighted with things neither of them quite knew how to say. Then Rowan stood. "Get some rest. You've been working 18-hour days for weeks. The operation will survive if you sleep." "I'll sleep when we've finalized the holding company structure." "Clara." She looked up at the tone in his voice. Rowan's expression was softer than usual, almost concerned. "You've proven yourself 10 times over. You don't have to keep grinding yourself down to earn your place here." "I know," Clara said. "I'm not doing it to prove anything. I'm doing it because it matters, because we're building something that will outlast us, and I want it built right." Rowan nodded slowly. "All right, but take tomorrow off. That's an order from your business partner. I'll consider it. Consider it accepted." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your sister asked if you're happy. What did you tell her?" Clara hadn't realized he'd seen the letter. "I haven't answered yet. I'm still figuring out what to say." "Tell her yes," Rowan said. "It might not be the happiness either of us expected, but it's real. That's worth something." After he left, Clara sat alone in the study, thinking about happiness and partnership and the strange path that had brought her here. She picked up her pen and wrote to Lenora. "The work is hard, but it's meaningful. The life is not what I imagined, but it's mine. I'm building something I can be proud of. So yes, in ways I'm still learning to understand, I'm happy." She sealed the letter and set it aside for the morning post. Outside, the compound was settling into evening quiet. Men heading to the mess hall for dinner, lanterns being lit against the gathering dark. Clara looked around the study, at the ledgers that represented months of work, at the plans spread across the desk, at the evidence of everything she'd accomplished since arriving at Ironwood Ridge. She'd come here desperate and frightened, trading herself for her family's survival. She'd stayed because she'd found something unexpected: purpose, competence, a partnership that challenged and fulfilled her in equal measure. And now, with Benjamin's threat neutralized and the operation transforming into something stronger, she could finally see a future that extended beyond mere survival. A future built on strategy and strength and the kind of power that came from knowing exactly what you were capable of. The transformation of Ironwood Ridge took 18 months of relentless work, but by the spring of Clara's 3rd year on the mountain, the operation bore almost no resemblance to what she'd first encountered. The changes went deeper than reorganized ledgers and restructured contracts. They'd fundamentally altered how the entire enterprise functioned. Chen's manufacturing operation now produced precision industrial equipment that mining companies and railroad operations competed to purchase. The profit margins were lower than the weapons trade had generated, but the volume was triple and growing. More importantly, every transaction could survive scrutiny. Clara had negotiated contracts with major buyers, established relationships with territorial officials who saw Ironwood Ridge as a model of innovative mountain industry. The old brokerage network had evolved into something Marcus called strategic procurement consulting, still connecting
This
buyers
story
with
was
hard-to-source
posted on the
materials,
channel west
but
of
through
Betrayal.
documented channels
Please
that
do not
bent
repost
regulations
it
without
in any
breaking
form.
them. They charged premium fees for expertise and discretion, and clients paid willingly because the service was genuinely valuable. But success brought new complications. As Ironwood Ridge's reputation grew, so did attention from competitors, investors, and people who wanted to understand how a remote mountain operation had become so profitable so quickly. One of those people was Victoria Brennan. She arrived on a warm May morning, unannounced, riding up the mountain trail in a carriage that must have cost more than most operations made in a year. Clara watched from the study window as the carriage rolled into the compound, noting the quality of the horses, the Eastern styling of the vehicle, the way men stopped working to stare. Victoria Brennan stepped out wearing traveling clothes that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe. She was perhaps 40, striking rather than beautiful, with steel gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that assessed everything they touched. Money and power radiated from her like heat. "Mrs. Hale?" she said when Clara came out to greet her. "I'm Victoria Brennan. I apologize for arriving without notice, but I've learned that the most honest picture of an operation comes from seeing it as it actually functions, not as it's prepared to be seen." Clara recognized a test when she saw one. "Then you're welcome to look around as much as you like. We have nothing to hide." Victoria's smile was sharp. "Everyone has something to hide, Mrs. Hale. The question is whether what you're hiding matters." They walked the compound, Victoria asking pointed questions about production capacity, profit margins, worker retention, supply chain vulnerabilities. She spoke with workers directly, examined equipment, reviewed materials. Clara answered everything honestly because the new structure allowed for honesty. There were still secrets, there always would be, but none that would destroy them if exposed. Over lunch in the main house, Victoria finally revealed her purpose. "I represent a consortium of investors from Boston and New York. We're looking for promising Western enterprises to support with capital and connections. Ironwood Ridge has caught our attention." "I'm flattered," Clara said carefully, "but we're not currently seeking investors." "Perhaps you should be. With proper capital injection, you could triple your manufacturing capacity, expand into new markets, potentially establish satellite operations in other territories." Victoria set down her fork. "You've built something impressive here, Mrs. Hale, but you're constrained by geography and limited resources. We could change that." "At what cost?" "Standard terms. We'd acquire 40% ownership in exchange for capital investment and strategic support. You and your husband would retain operational control, but major decisions would require consortium approval." Clara kept her expression neutral, but her mind was calculating rapidly. 40% ownership meant outside parties examining their books, their operations, their decisions. It meant exposure to scrutiny that could uncover things better left hidden. It also meant resources they couldn't access alone, connections that could accelerate growth exponentially. "I'll need to discuss this with my husband," Clara said. "Of course. I'll be staying at the Mountaineer Hotel in Pinewood Hollow for the next 3 days. You can send word when you've reached a decision." After Victoria left, Clara found Rowan in the machine shop. She explained the offer while he worked, his hands never stopping their methodical adjustment of equipment. "What do you think?" he asked when she'd finished. "I think it's an opportunity and a trap. We'd gain resources and connections that could make us one of the largest operations in the territory. But we'd also lose autonomy, invite scrutiny we've spent 2 years trying to avoid, and tie ourselves to people whose interests might not align with ours." Rowan set down his tools and faced her fully. "You're asking the wrong question. The question isn't what I think, it's what you want to build." "This is your operation." "It's our operation," Rowan interrupted. "Has been since you restructured the entire thing. So what do you want? Do you want to stay small and independent, or do you want to build something that extends beyond this mountain?" Clara realized she'd been thinking about this since Victoria's carriage had appeared. Not the specific offer, but the larger question of ambition and scope. Did she want to manage a successful mountain enterprise, or did she want to build an empire? "I want to expand," she said slowly, "but not with Victoria's consortium, not with terms that give outsiders control over what we've built. If we're going to grow, we do it on our terms, with partners we choose. Then we need capital from somewhere else." "We need capital from everywhere else," Clara corrected. "Multiple smaller investors rather than one large consortium. People who believe in what we're building but don't demand controlling interest. It's harder to arrange, takes more time to negotiate, but it keeps us independent." Rowan nodded slowly. "You've already thought about how to structure this. I've thought about nothing else since Victoria walked through that door." Clara pulled out papers she'd been working on. "Look, we create a formal corporate structure, Ironwood Ridge Corporation. We sell shares in small percentages to multiple investors. No single investor owns more than 5%. We retain 51% ownership between us, maintaining control. The other 49% gets divided among enough different parties that they can't coordinate against us. That's complicated. It requires trust from investors who won't have meaningful control. It requires demonstrating that we're profitable enough to make minority ownership worthwhile, which we are." Clara spread out financial projections. We've tripled revenue in 18 months while improving worker conditions and maintaining quality. We can prove we're a sound investment. We just need to find the right investors. They spent the next week developing the proposal. Clara drafted documentation, created presentations, identified potential investors, successful operators from other territories who understood mountain industry, territorial officials who'd seen their operation firsthand, even some of the workers who'd been with them long enough to have savings they might invest. When they sent word to Victoria Brennan declining her offer, they included their alternative proposal. Her response came back within a day. Interesting, ambitious, probably won't work, but I admire the audacity. If you manage to pull this together, let me know. I might take a 5% stake just to see how it plays out. The capital raise took 6 months of relentless negotiation. Clara traveled to other territories, made presentations to skeptical investors, proved over and over that Ironwood Ridge represented sound investment. She faced resistance because she was a woman, because the operation was remote, because unconventional corporate structures made traditional investors nervous. But she also found believers. Operators who'd seen what they'd built and wanted to be part of it. Officials who understood that supporting successful mountain enterprises benefited the entire territory. Workers who'd saved money and wanted to invest in their own futures. By November, they'd raised enough capital to fund major expansion. The corporate structure protected their control while providing resources they'd never have accessed alone. And critically, no single investor had enough ownership to threaten their autonomy. The expansion began immediately. They acquired 2 additional properties, one with established timber resources, another with water rights that would power expanded manufacturing. They hired aggressively, bringing in skilled workers from other territories with offers of good wages, safe conditions, and profit sharing. They invested in new equipment, better infrastructure, improved worker housing. Within a year, Ironwood Ridge Corporation employed over 200 people across 3 locations. They'd become the largest employer in the region, a powerhouse that even major Eastern operations had to acknowledge. But growth created new problems. Management became more complex, coordination more difficult, the distance between Clara and daily operations wider. She found herself spending more time on strategy and less on implementation, more time managing managers, and less time working directly with the business she'd helped transform. It was exhausting in entirely new ways. One evening, working late in the study that had expanded to accommodate corporate headquarters functions, Clara found herself staring at financial reports without really seeing them. Her eyes hurt. Her head ached. She'd eaten nothing since breakfast and couldn't remember what day it was. Rowan appeared in the doorway holding 2 plates of food. Mrs. Chen sent these up, said if we both died from overwork, she wasn't explaining it to the investors. Clara managed a tired laugh. She has a point. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes before Rowan spoke again. You need to hire an operations manager, someone to handle day-to-day coordination so you can focus on strategic planning. I can manage it. You're managing it by working 20-hour days and forgetting to eat. That's not sustainable. Neither is trusting someone else with operations this complex. Then don't trust just anyone. Find someone capable, train them properly, give them real authority but clear boundaries. Rowan set down his fork. You did it with Thomas, with Marcus, with Chen. You can do it again. Clara knew he was right, but admitting it meant acknowledging she couldn't control everything personally anymore.
This story was posted on the channel west of the trail.
Even
Please do not
someone as driven as
repost
she'd
it in any
become.
form.
I don't want to lose sight of how things actually work, she said quietly. I don't want to become one of those managers who makes decisions from an office without understanding the reality on the ground. Then don't. Stay connected, visit the operations regularly, keep relationships with workers, but accept that your role has changed. You're not managing timber contracts anymore. You're building infrastructure that will outlast us both. It was the longest speech she'd heard from him in months. They'd been so consumed with expansion that their partnership had become almost entirely professional, strategy sessions and contract reviews and investor meetings. The personal connection that had developed during those first intense years had gotten buried under corporate growth. When did we become this? Clara asked. When did we stop being partners building something together and become executives managing a corporation? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Probably around the same time we stopped having dinner together because we were both too busy working in separate offices. Or when we stopped walking the operations daily because we had meetings scheduled. Or when success became about numbers on reports instead of the actual work. I don't like it. Neither do I. Rowan stood, walked to the window overlooking the compound. The original buildings were still there, but surrounded now by new construction, expanded facilities, the physical manifestation of everything they'd built. But I'm not sure how to change it without sacrificing what we've achieved. Clara joined him at the window. Maybe we don't change it. Maybe we just adapt. Accept that this is what success looks like at this scale. The price of building something this big is losing some of what made it personal. That's a depressing thought. It's a realistic one. They stood there in silence, watching the compound below. After a while, Rowan spoke again. Your father's doing better. Lenora wrote that he's well enough to walk again, that the treatment's working. Clara had received the same letter. Edmund Vance would never be what he'd been before the mine collapse, but he was stable, comfortable, cared for. The entire reason she'd made this bargain in the first place had been achieved. And Lenora's engagement, Clara said, to that school teacher from Denver. She sounds happy in her letters. She is, because you gave her the freedom to choose her own future instead of being trapped by poverty. Rowan turned to face Clara. You did what you set out to do. You saved your family. Everything since then has been building something beyond that original purpose. Is that enough? Is saving my family and building a corporation enough? I don't know. Is it? Clara thought about the question honestly. She'd come to Ironwood Ridge desperate and afraid, trading herself to save her father. She'd stayed because she'd found purpose in the work, satisfaction in competence, partnership with someone who valued what she could do. But somewhere in the expansion and growth and relentless drive for more, she'd lost track of what she actually wanted beyond success itself. I want to matter, she said finally. Not just as an executive or a manager or someone who moves money around. I want the work to mean something beyond profit margins. Then make it mean something, Martha Rowan said simply. You've got resources now, influence, workers who trust you. Use it for more than just building a bigger corporation. Over the next months, Clara began shifting focus. She established worker education programs, bringing in teachers to provide literacy training, numerical skills, basic education for workers' children. She implemented profit-sharing arrangements that gave long-term employees ownership stake in the company's success. She created safety protocols that became industry standard, reducing injuries across all operations. She also started investing in the surrounding communities. The territories were still rough, still developing, still struggling with basic infrastructure. Clara used Ironwood Ridge's resources to fund road improvements, support community schools, provide medical care to settlements that had none. It wasn't charity. It was strategic investment in the ecosystem that supported their operations. But it was also something more. It was using power for purpose beyond accumulation. The work brought her back into contact with the actual communities affected by what they'd built. She visited settlements, talked with families, understood how the decisions made in corporate offices translated into real lives. It grounded her in ways the endless meetings and financial reports never could. One trip took her back to Pinewood Hollow, the dying town she'd left 4 years earlier. It looked even worse than she remembered. More buildings abandoned, fewer people on the streets. The general store where she'd once worked now shuttered completely. She found her old house where her father and Lenora had lived. It stood empty, windows broken, the small garden overgrown. Someone else's failure now, someone else's loss. Standing there, Clara felt the full weight of how far she'd come. From this broken house to corporate headquarters. From desperate negotiation in a hotel dining room to commanding resources that could reshape entire regions. From survival to empire. But she also felt the cost. The isolation that came with power. The distance between who she'd been and who she'd become. The way success could hollow you out if you weren't careful. Could make you forget why you'd wanted it in the first place. She bought the house, paid cash to whoever owned it now, had it cleaned and repaired, and turned it into a community center. A place where people struggling like her family had struggled could find resources, training, support. It wasn't much. It wouldn't save Pinewood Hollow from its slow death, but it was something. When she returned to Ironwood Ridge, she found Rowan waiting with news. Benjamin's operation collapsed. He overextended trying to compete with us, took on debt he couldn't service, and his creditors seized everything. He's ruined. Clara absorbed this. She should have felt triumphant. The enemy who tried to destroy them had destroyed himself instead. But all she felt was tired. What's he gonna do? Don't know. Don't care. Rowan's tone was flat. He made his choices. He earned his outcome. He's still family. He stopped being family when he tried to ruin us. Some bridges get burned beyond repair. Clara thought about this, about grudges and family and the price of winning. Offer him a job. Rowan stared at her. You're joking. I'm not. Offer him a position. Nothing high level, nothing with real authority, but something stable that lets him rebuild his life without complete humiliation. Clara met his eyes. We won, Rowan. We won so thoroughly that he'll never threaten us again. We can afford to be generous. He doesn't deserve generosity. Probably not, but we're not doing it for him. We're doing it because holding grudges is exhausting, and because having him dependent on us is better than having him desperate and dangerous. She paused. And because maybe I'm tired of every relationship being purely transactional. Maybe I want to believe people can change, can be more than their worst decisions. Rowan was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'll make the offer. But if he causes problems, then we handle it. But let's at least try. Benjamin accepted the position. Clara suspected it was humiliating for him, working for the operation he'd tried to destroy, taking orders from the nephew he'd challenged. But he showed up, did the work, and kept his mouth shut. Slowly, grudgingly, a sort of peace developed. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even really reconciliation. But it was an end to active hostility, which was something. As the 5th anniversary of Clara's arrival at Ironwood Ridge approached, the operation prepared for a major milestone. They were opening their 4th facility, a massive manufacturing complex that would employ 300 workers and produce equipment for railroad companies across multiple territories. The opening celebration was scheduled for late September, a formal event with territorial officials, investors, business leaders from across the region. It would be the largest gathering Ironwood Ridge had ever hosted. Clara threw herself into preparation with the same intensity she brought to everything. But as the date approached, she found herself increasingly anxious in ways she couldn't quite explain. This should have been a triumph, proof of everything they'd built. So why did it feel like standing at the edge of something she couldn't see? The night before the celebration, unable to sleep, she walked the original compound. The old buildings were still there, maintained carefully, still functional. But they were dwarfed now by newer, larger structures. The intimacy of the early operation had been replaced by industrial scale. She found Rowan in the study, reviewing his speech for the next day. He looked up when she entered. Can't sleep either? He asked. Too much in my head. Clara sat down across from him. I keep thinking about that first day, when you brought me here and I had no idea what I was walking into, how terrified I was, how certain I was that I'd made a terrible mistake. Did you make a mistake? Clara considered the question honestly. No, but I became someone I didn't expect to become, someone I'm not sure I always recognize. Is that bad? I don't know. I'm proud of what we've built. I know it matters, that it employs people and creates value and all the things successful enterprises are supposed to do. But sometimes I miss the simplicity of those early days, when it was just you and me and Thomas and a handful of workers trying to make something work.
This story was posted on the channel
Rowan
west
set down
of
his
Betrayal.
papers.
Please do not repost
clear
it
enemies
in any
and
form.
obvious problems. When Benjamin was threatening us, when Wells was inspecting us, when we were fighting to survive, there was clarity in that. Now we're successful, and success is complicated. There's no obvious opponent, no clear challenge to overcome, just the endless work of maintaining and growing what we've built. Yes, Sarah, Clara said, grateful he understood. Exactly that. So what do we do about it? Clara thought about this. What did she want, really? Not more success, they had plenty of that. Not more money, they had more than they could spend. Not more power, they already wielded influence across the territory. I want to build something that matters beyond us, she said finally. Not just a corporation that makes money, something that actually changes how business works out here, that proves you can be successful without exploiting people, that you can build wealth without destroying communities, that power can be used for more than just accumulating more power. That's ambitious. Everything we've done has been ambitious. Why stop now? The celebration the next day was everything they'd planned. Territorial officials gave speeches praising Ironwood Ridge as a model of Western enterprise. Investors talked about growth potential and market expansion. Workers celebrated the jobs and opportunity the new facility would create. But when Clara gave her speech, she talked about something different. She talked about responsibility, how success created obligations to the people and communities that made it possible, how profit couldn't be the only measure of value, how corporations had power that should be wielded thoughtfully, carefully, with consideration for long-term impact beyond quarterly returns. Some in the audience looked confused. Others looked uncomfortable. But she saw workers nodding, saw people who understood that she was talking about more than just business. After the formal program ended and the celebration continued, Victoria Brennan approached Clara. The Eastern investor had taken her 5% stake and followed the operation's growth with evident interest. "That was quite a speech," Victoria said. "Not the usual corporate celebration rhetoric. I meant every word." "I know you did. That's what concerns me." Victoria sipped her champagne. "You're talking about fundamentally rethinking how corporations operate, how success is measured, how power gets used. That's threatening to a lot of people who've built their fortunes on the current system." "Then they can be threatened," Clara said calmly. "I'm not interested in protecting a system that only works for people already at the top." Victoria studied her with those sharp eyes. "You've changed since I first came here. You were competent then, impressive, but now you're something else, something dangerous to the established order." "Good," Victoria smiled. "Good indeed. If you're serious about this, about actually changing how business operates, you're going to need allies. People who have resources and are willing to use them for something beyond accumulation. I might know some people. I'd appreciate the introductions." Over the next year, Clara built what she started calling the Sustainable Enterprise Coalition, a network of operators, investors, and officials who shared her vision of business that created value beyond profit. They established standards for worker treatment, environmental responsibility, community investment. They created certification programs that identified operations meeting those standards. It was slow work, frustrating work. Many operators saw it as naive interference in markets that should be left alone. But some understood that the current system was unsustainable, that communities being exploited would eventually rebel, that long-term success required treating people as more than extractable resources. Ironwood Ridge became the flagship example. Their profit margins were strong despite, or perhaps because of, their investment in workers and communities. Their employee retention was the highest in the territory. Their production quality was unmatched because workers who felt valued did better work. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still conflicts, still difficult decisions where values clashed with practicality. But it was better than what existed before, and better mattered. 5 years after arriving at Ironwood Ridge, Clara stood on the ridge overlooking the valley, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The compound below was a small city now, lights glowing in dozens of buildings, smoke rising from multiple operations. She'd come here desperate, selling herself to save her family. She'd stayed because she'd found work that mattered, and she'd built something that had grown far beyond what she'd imagined that first frightening day. Rowan joined her on the ridge, standing close but not touching. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had words for, partnership and friendship, and a kind of love built on respect rather than romance. They were married in law and fact, but the marriage was defined by what they'd built together rather than conventional affection. "Lenora's coming to visit next month," Clara said, "bringing her husband. She wants to see what we've built." "What will you tell her when she asks if you're happy?" Clara thought about this. Happiness seemed like too simple a word for what she felt. Satisfied, maybe. Purposeful. Aware that she was using her life for something that mattered. "I'll tell her I made a choice I can live with," Clara said, "that I traded one kind of future for another, and the one I got turned out to be more interesting than I expected. That's diplomatic. It's true." Clara turned to face him. I don't regret marrying you, Rowan. I don't regret any of this. But I also don't pretend it's what either of us would have chosen if circumstances had been different. No, Rowan agreed, but circumstances were what they were, and we made something remarkable from them. They stood there as darkness fell, watching the compound transform into patterns of light below. Clara thought about the girl she'd been, signing that contract in the hotel dining room. That girl had been terrified and desperate, certain she was making a devil's bargain that would cost her everything. She'd been wrong. It had cost her things, simplicity, certain kinds of dreams, the person she might have become in different circumstances. But it had given her more: purpose, competence, the satisfaction of building something that would outlast her. The transaction had never been as simple as trading herself for money. It had been trading one possible life for another. And the life she'd built, for all its complications and costs, was one she could be proud of. "Come on," Rowan said finally. "Mrs. Chen will be annoyed if we're late for dinner again." They walked back down to the compound together, partners in the empire they'd built from desperation and determination. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, witness to the small human dramas played out in their shadows. Clara Vance had come to these mountains with nothing but debt and fear. Clara Hale would leave them, someday, decades hence, having proven that power built on partnership could accomplish more than power hoarded alone. That success measured by community impact mattered more than success measured only in profit. That the most radical thing a woman could do was refuse to accept that her choices were limited to other people's definitions. She'd made her choice, she'd built her empire, and she'd done it on her own terms, one calculated decision at a time. That was enough. It had to be enough. And somehow, surprisingly, it was.